"Sit down and wait, or I will have you removed from this building." The words cut through the fluorescent hum of the emergency room at 10:26 p.m. on a Thursday night in April. The nurse behind the triage desk did not look up when she said it. Her fingers kept moving across the keyboard, eyes fixed on the monitor, as though the woman standing in front of her, 59 years old, left hand pressed against her sternum, a thin film of cold sweat visible along her hairline, was not worth the effort of eye contact. The woman having a heart attack had just been told she was not having an emergency, and the hospital she had been told to wait inside, every floor, every wall, every piece of equipment in its 4-year-old frame, existed because of the $58 million she had personally raised to build it. But nobody in this emergency room knew that. Not yet. Nadine Whitfield had walked through the automatic glass doors of Mercy Ridge Medical Center at 10:22 p.m., alone, wearing a gray wool cardigan over a cotton blouse, khaki pants soft from years of washing, and flat-soled walking shoes. No jewelry, no designer handbag. Her silver hair was pulled into a low bun, and her only accessory was a worn leather shoulder bag that sagged with the weight of whatever she carried inside. She had approached the triage desk the way anyone would, carefully, holding her chest, breathing through the tightness that had started 40 minutes earlier in the parking lot of a grocery store 6 blocks away. "I'm experiencing chest pain," she had said. Calm, clear. "Left-sided, radiating down my arm, shortness of breath. It started approximately 40 minutes ago." The nurse, Pamela Stokes, according to the name badge clipped to her scrubs, had not looked up then either. She pulled a triage intake form onto her screen, asked for name, date of birth, insurance card. Nadine provided all three. Pamela glanced at the insurance card for less than 2 seconds, slid it back across the counter, and typed. Then she delivered the verdict. ESI Level 4, non-urgent. A pause while she printed a wristband. "Have a seat in the waiting area. You'll be called." Nadine did not argue. She took the wristband, pressed it onto her left wrist with her right hand because her left arm was growing heavy, and turned toward the waiting area. But she stopped. On the wall directly beside the triage window, mounted at eye level behind clear acrylic, was a chart. Bold heading, Emergency Severity Index, Triage Classification, 5 levels, color-coded, with descriptions. Her eyes found level 2 immediately. The words were printed in red. Emergent, chest pain with cardiac history, shortness of breath, diaphoresis. Immediate evaluation required. Chest pain with cardiac history. She had hypertension managed with lisinopril. Shortness of breath. She had told the nurse that. Diaphoresis. The sweat was visible on her own forehead. Every symptom she had just reported matched level 2, emergent. The form Pamela Stokes had just completed read, mild discomfort, no acute distress, ambulatory ESI 4. Nadine read the wall chart once more, read the wristband on her wrist. The gap between what she had said and what had been written was not an error. Errors were random. This was a specific, deliberate downgrade. She walked to the row of molded plastic chairs bolted to the floor along the far wall of the waiting area and sat down. She set her shoulder bag on the empty seat beside her. She reached inside, past a phone, past a wallet, past a folded document in a manila envelope, and pulled out a small black notebook with a pen clipped to its cover. She opened it to a blank page and began to write, date in the upper left margin, time beside it, a name in the right margin, and in the center, in steady, even handwriting that did not waver despite the pressure behind her ribs. 10:26 p.m. Triage Nurse P. Stokes. ESI 4 assigned. Symptoms reported. L chest pain radiating L arm, SOB. Diaphoresis times 40 minutes. Symptoms recorded in chart. Mild discomfort, no acute distress. Discrepancy noted. She wrote the way someone writes who has been trained to turn observations into evidence. Neat, specific, structured. In rooms where every detail could become an exhibit. If you're already feeling the tension in this story, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens to this woman over the next 8 hours will make your blood boil. The waiting room of Mercy Ridge Medical Center's emergency department held 19 people at 10:30 p.m. on that Thursday. 7 were seated in the main row. 3 occupied the pediatric corner, where a child of about 4 coughed in wet, barking spasms while her mother rocked her. 2 teenagers sat near the vending machine, one holding a towel wrapped around his hand, blood spotting through the white terry cloth. The rest were scattered. An elderly man dozing upright, a young woman scrolling her phone with one hand and pressing the other against her lower back, a couple speaking quietly in Spanish near the entrance. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in the same flat, greenish pallor. A television mounted high on the wall played a 24-hour news channel with the volume too low to hear, but the closed captions scrolling in blocky white text. The air smelled of institutional disinfectant, the chemical sweetness of hand sanitizer dispensers mounted every 12 feet, and underneath it all, the faint metallic scent that emergency rooms never quite scrub away. Nadine sat in the third chair from the left in the main row. She had positioned herself where she could see both the triage window and the double doors leading back to the treatment bays. An old habit, or maybe not a habit at all, but a practice. The distinction mattered, though no one in this room would have known why. She watched. At 10:41 p.m., a white man in his early 40s walked through the automatic doors. Polo shirt, khaki shorts, boat shoes. He approached the triage desk holding his stomach. Pamela Stokes looked up immediately, the first time Nadine had seen her lift her eyes from the screen for a patient. A brief exchange. The man sat down. At 10:49 p.m., 8 minutes after arrival, his name was called. He stood and walked through the double doors. Nadine had arrived at 10:22 p.m. She had reported chest pain radiating to her arm. She was still sitting in the same plastic chair. She opened the notebook. In the right margin, beside her previous entry, she added, 10:41. Male patient, approximately 40, presenting with abdominal complaint, arrived 19 minutes after me, called at 10:49. Triage time to treatment bay, 8 minutes. My triage time so far, 27 minutes and counting. Triage level for him not visible from waiting area. She noted the time difference not with outrage, but with the detached precision of someone cataloging data points. Each entry in the same format. Time in the left margin, observation in the center, name or description of relevant personnel in the right margin. 3 columns, consistent. The kind of documentation that would survive scrutiny if scrutiny ever came. At 10:55 p.m., a security guard entered the waiting area from the interior corridor. Large man, 6'2", maybe 6'3", broad through the chest and shoulders, the kind of build that filled a doorway. His name badge read Riggins. He wore the navy blue uniform of hospital security, a radio clipped to his shoulder, keys jingling on a retractable ring at his belt. He walked the perimeter of the waiting room with the slow, deliberate stride of someone who considered the space his territory. He stopped in front of Nadine. "Ma'am?" He looked down at her from his full height. "You doing okay? You need directions somewhere?" The question was not concern. Nadine recognized the tone instantly. The welfare check that was actually a challenge. Are you supposed to be here? Do you belong? The subtext lived in the pause between okay and the slight emphasis on directions, as though the most likely explanation for a black woman in a gray cardigan sitting in an emergency room at 11 p.m. was that she had wandered in by accident. "I'm a patient." She met his eyes without flinching. "I'm waiting to be seen." Riggins let his gaze travel down. The cardigan, the khaki pants, the flat shoes, the absence of any visible marker of status or urgency. His expression did not change. He said nothing further, just turned and continued his circuit, boots heavy on the linoleum. Nadine wrote, 10:55 p.m., security, Riggins, approached me specifically, asked if I needed directions. Did not approach any other waiting patient. Possible profiling interaction. She closed the notebook on her finger, keeping her page, and leaned her head back against the wall. The pressure in her chest had not lessened. If anything, it had settled deeper, a dull, persistent weight that made each breath feel like it required conscious effort. She knew what that meant. She knew what the progression looked like. She had watched it happen before, in another hospital, in another city, to someone she loved more than anyone else in the world. And by the time anyone had taken it seriously, it was too late. The memory pressed against her as hard as the pain. She pushed it down. Not now, not here. Through the glass partitions separating the ER waiting area from the main hospital lobby, she could see the entrance atrium of Mercy Ridge Medical Center. Modern design, 4 years old, clean lines, polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that during the day flooded the space with natural light. Above the reception desk, etched into a slab of pale marble, were the words, Mercy Ridge Medical Center, dedicated to equitable care for all. Equitable care for all. Nadine stared at those words through the glass. The building was beautiful. The equipment was state-of-the-art. She could see the new triage monitoring stations, the digital check-in kiosks, the automated hand hygiene dispensers, all of it gleaming and functional and exactly what a modern emergency facility should look like. But infrastructure did not determine how human beings treated each other. A $58 million building could still house a waiting room where a black woman with chest pain sat for an hour, while a white man with a stomachache walked straight through. The cardigan she wore was warm. The chair was hard. The clock on the wall said 11:07 p.m., and no one had called her name. She counted her breaths. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, the technique she had learned years ago, not from a meditation app or a wellness podcast, but from a protocol designed for people who needed to stay functional in environments where panic could be fatal. Where it came from, she would not say. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if the system worked the way it was supposed to. But the system was not working tonight. 11:47 p.m., 90 minutes since she arrived. The pressure in her chest had migrated, heavier now, spreading to her jaw, a new development that made her sit upright and grip the armrest of the plastic chair. Her left arm tingled from shoulder to fingertips. The sweat on her forehead had not dried. She stood. It took effort. Her legs felt uncertain, as though the floor had shifted slightly beneath her. She walked back to the triage window and waited until Pamela Stokes finished typing whatever she was typing. "Excuse me." Nadine's voice was steady, controlled. "I reported chest pain radiating to my left arm 90 minutes ago. My symptoms are worsening. I'm now experiencing jaw pain and increased shortness of breath. I'm requesting reevaluation of my triage level." Pamela's fingers paused on the keyboard. She did not turn. "You'll be called when it's your turn. My condition is deteriorating. I'm requesting—" "Ma'am." Now Pamela looked up. The expression on her face carried the particular patience that is actually impatience. The slow blink, the slight tilt of the head, the half-smile that communicated tolerance at its limit. "We have actual emergencies tonight. A child with respiratory distress. A laceration that needs suturing. You walked in here on your own 2 feet. You're talking to me just fine. When a bed opens up, you'll be seen. Now please, sit down and wait. Actual emergencies." The word actual hung in the air between them, like a verdict. Nadine held Pamela's gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough to register the dismissal, long enough to confirm that this was not going to change through politeness or repetition. Then she turned, walked back to her seat, and opened the notebook. 11:47 p.m., returned to triage. Reported worsening symptoms, jaw pain, increased SOB, L-arm tingling. Nurse Stokes stated, "We have actual emergencies tonight. Implied my chest pain is not an actual emergency. Denied reevaluation of triage level. Second refusal to reassess." She underlined the word actual twice. The waiting room had thinned slightly. The teenagers with the hand laceration had been called back. The elderly man had been wheeled somewhere by an orderly. The child was still coughing. The Spanish-speaking couple had left. In their place, a new arrival. A woman in her 30s, white, holding an ice pack against her ankle, hopping slightly as she approached triage. Nadine watched Pamela look up immediately, smile, hand over the intake form without being asked. She wrote down the time. She wrote down what she saw. The building was beautiful. The equipment was new. The motto on the marble wall promised equitable care for all. Nadine leaned her head against the wall again and closed her eyes. The notebook remained open on her lap, pen resting in the crease between pages, the handwriting growing smaller and denser as the available space shrank. The page was nearly full. She had been trained to fill pages like this, methodically, without emotion, with the understanding that what seemed like mundane notation could become the foundation of something much larger. But that was a different life, and this was an emergency room, and her heart was beating wrong, and nobody cared. 2 hours and 9 minutes after Nadine Whitfield walked into Mercy Ridge Medical Center, her name was finally called. Not because the triage system flagged her, not because Pamela Stokes reconsidered, not because the ESI Level 4 designation triggered any automatic reevaluation protocol, which it should have, given that she had now been waiting more than twice the recommended time for her assigned acuity level. Her name was called because Dr. Josie Navarro, a second-year emergency medicine resident finishing the last hour of her overnight shift, scrolled through the electronic tracking board during a brief pause between patients and saw something that stopped her mid-sip of cold coffee. Bay 7. Patient name, Whitfield, Nadine. Age, 59. Chief complaint, chest discomfort. Triage level, ESI 4. Wait time, 2 hours 9 minutes. Orders, none. Labs, none. Imaging, none. Chest pain in a 59-year-old with a 2-hour wait and 0 workup. Navarro set down her coffee and walked to the nurse's station where Pamela Stokes was updating a whiteboard with bed assignments. The patient in Bay 7, Whitfield, chest pain with arm radiation. Why is she ESI 4? Pamela did not stop writing. She's fine, walked in on her own. No acute distress. I triaged her based on clinical observation. She's 59 with chest pain radiating to her arm. That's ESI2 at minimum. Has anyone ordered an EKG? Dr. Lund will get to her. He's been busy. Navarro knew the hierarchy. Charge nurses controlled the flow. Challenging Pamela Stokes, 18 years in this department, a woman who could rearrange your shift schedule with a single phone call to the nurse manager, was not something second-year residents did without consequences. But a 59-year-old woman had been sitting in a treatment bay for 2 hours with chest pain and zero diagnostic workup. Navarro pulled the chart up on the nearest workstation, printed the intake form, and walked to Bay 7 herself. The bay was a curtained-off space, barely large enough for a stretcher, a rolling stool, and a monitor stand that was powered off. Nadine sat on the edge of the stretcher, still in her street clothes. Nobody had asked her to change into a gown, with her notebook open on her lap. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm Dr. Navarro. I'm a resident physician here. Can you tell me what brought you in tonight?" Nadine looked up, studied the young woman in the white coat. Late 20s, dark hair pulled back, name badge with PGY2 printed below her name. A resident, not the attending. "Substernal chest pressure," Nadine said. "Radiating to my left arm and jaw. Diaphoresis. Onset approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes ago. I have a history of hypertension, managed with lisinopril, 20 milligrams daily. Family history of cardiac disease. My husband died of sudden cardiac arrest 6 years ago." Navarro's pen stopped moving. Patients did not usually speak like that. They said, "My chest hurts," or "I feel tight here," or "something's wrong." They did not use the word substernal. They did not cite their own medication dosages without checking a pill bottle. They did not provide a structured history that sounded like it had been dictated from a clinical reference. Navarro made a note, comprehensive historian, medically literate, and was opening her mouth to explain that she wanted to order an EKG and blood work immediately when the curtain pulled back. "I'll take this one, Navarro." Dr. Trevor Lund stepped into the bay. 41, angular face, wire-rimmed glasses, the unruffled demeanor of a board-certified emergency physician who had been running this ER for 9 years. His voice was pleasant. His smile was professional. He held a tablet in one hand and a stylus in the other, and he used both the way a conductor uses a baton, to direct attention. "You've got the kid with the laceration in Bay 3. Go ahead and close that up." It was not a suggestion. Navarro looked at Nadine, looked at Lund. The attending outranked her by 7 years of training and an entire tier of hospital authority. She could push back, but pushing back against the attending in front of a patient violated every unwritten rule of the residency hierarchy. "I was just about to order." "I've got it." Lund's smile did not waver. "Bay 3, Navarro. The kid's been waiting." Navarro left. The curtain fell closed behind her. Lund sat down on the rolling stool, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at his tablet. Not at Nadine, at the screen. He scrolled through the triage note, the intake form, the demographic information. His thumb moved in small practiced flicks. "So," he looked up briefly, "you're having some chest discomfort?" "Chest pain." Nadine's correction was immediate. "Not discomfort, pressure, radiating to my left arm and jaw." Lund's eyebrows rose a fraction, the micro-expression of a man unaccustomed to being corrected by patients. He tapped something on the tablet. "Any history of anxiety? Panic attacks?" "No." Nadine's voice remained level. "I have a history of hypertension, managed with lisinopril. Family history of cardiac disease." He typed. Did not ask follow-up questions about the cardiac family history. Did not reach for the stethoscope hanging around his neck. Did not touch the blood pressure cuff mounted on the wall. Did not power on the cardiac monitor standing 2 feet from the stretcher, he typed. Nadine watched his fingers on the tablet screen. She could not read the text from her angle, but she could see the rhythm of his entry. Short bursts, minimal keystrokes, the pattern of someone filling in template fields rather than composing detailed notes. "I'd like to know what you're documenting," she said. Lund paused. For the first time, he looked at her. Not at the screen, not at the clipboard, at her. His eyes moved across her face, her cardigan, her flat shoes, the worn leather bag on the stretcher beside her. The assessment was quick and thorough, and arrived at a conclusion before he spoke a word. "I've noted your symptoms, and I'm documenting my clinical assessment," he returned to the tablet. "My impression is that your presentation is consistent with non-cardiac chest pain, likely musculoskeletal or anxiety-related. We'll monitor you for another 2 hours, reassess, and if you're stable, we can discuss discharge. No EKG, no blood work, no troponin, the single most critical lab test for ruling out myocardial infarction, no chest X-ray, No IV access. No cardiac monitor. Nothing. He stood, pocketed the stylus, turned toward the curtain. "For the record," Nadine said. He stopped. "For the record, I am requesting that my stated symptoms be documented accurately in the chart. I reported substernal chest pressure radiating to my left arm and jaw with diaphoresis. What I heard you dictate does not reflect what I reported." Lund turned back. The professional pleasantness had thinned. Underneath it, something colder. "I've documented my clinical assessment, Ms. Whitfield. That's how this works. The physician evaluates and records findings, not the patient. A clinical assessment requires a clinical examination. You have not examined me. You have not auscultated my chest. You have not taken my blood pressure. You have not ordered a single diagnostic test. That is not an assessment. That is an assumption." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Lund's jaw tightened. His grip on the tablet shifted, thumb pressing harder against the edge. "I'll check on you in 2 hours," he said and left. The curtain swayed in his wake. The bay was quiet again, just the distant hum of fluorescent lights, the muffled sounds of the ER beyond the curtain, and the slow, irregular rhythm of Nadine's breathing as the pressure in her chest settled deeper. She opened the notebook to the 3rd page, the first 2 were full, and wrote, 12:14 a.m., Dr. T. Lund attending. No physical examination performed, no stethoscope, no BP, no EKG ordered, no labs, no imaging. Documented non-cardiac chest pain and anxiety without basis. My stated symptoms: substernal pressure, L-arm and jaw radiation, diaphoresis. His chart entry: vague chest complaint, no objective findings, anxiety likely contributing. She paused, added one more line, underlined it twice. No screening examination per EMTALA. She did not explain in the notebook what EMTALA was or why she knew the statute by name. She simply wrote it, 4 capital letters and a line beneath them, with the certainty of someone referencing a tool she had used many times before. The bay had no clock. Nadine checked her phone. 12:17 a.m. She had been inside this emergency room for 1 hour and 55 minutes. She had been seen by a physician for approximately 4 minutes. She had received no diagnostic testing whatsoever. Her phone showed a missed call from a contact saved as D. Office. She did not return it. Below that, a text message from a different number. Board materials for next Tuesday, ready for your review. J. Hollis. She did not open it. She set the phone face down on the stretcher, pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, and waited. If this story is making you angry, imagine what happens when they find out who she really is. Like and subscribe. You're going to want to see every second of what comes next. 12:44 a.m., 30 minutes after Lund left. Nadine needed water. Her mouth was dry, a symptom she recognized, noted, and added to her growing list. No one had offered her water. No one had checked on her. The call button clipped to the stretcher rail had a small white label that read, "Press for nurse." She pressed it. Nothing happened. She waited 3 minutes by her phone's clock. Pressed again. The small red light on the call box blinked once and went dark. She pressed a 3rd time, held the button for 5 seconds, released. At 12:51 a.m., 7 minutes after the first press, she heard footsteps, not hurried, not concerned. The sound of someone arriving because protocol required acknowledgement, not because urgency demanded it. She swung her legs off the stretcher and stood, gripping the rail for balance. The dizziness was worse now, not the spinning kind, but the heavy kind, as though gravity had increased by 10% and her body had not adjusted. She walked out of the bay, past the curtain, and into the corridor. The nurse's station was 20 feet away. She could see the glow of multiple monitors, hear the quiet conversation of staff between tasks. She walked toward it, one hand trailing the wall for stability. She was halfway there when she heard it. "The lady in Bay 7? Pamela Stokes's voice, carrying from behind the partition with the casual volume of someone who did not expect to be overheard. "Drama queen. Walked in wearing house clothes, probably doesn't even have real insurance. Bet she's looking for pain meds. I've seen the type." A second voice, another nurse, younger, indistinct, offered a short, uncomfortable laugh. Not agreement, exactly. More like the sound of someone who knew better, but lacked the authority or the courage to say so. Nadine stopped walking. She stood in the corridor, one hand on the wall, and listened. "Lund said anxiety," Pamela continued. "Classic drug-seeking presentation. Come in at night, complain about chest pain, hope someone writes a script for the good stuff. We get 2 or 3 a week." The younger nurse murmured something too quiet to catch. "I know," Pamela said, "but trust me. 18 years in this ER. You learn to read people. And that woman is not having a cardiac event. Nadine stood very still. The fluorescent light above her buzzed faintly, a defective ballast that no one had replaced. Her chest hurt. Her arm was numb. Her jaw ached. And the charge nurse 20 feet away was telling a colleague that she was a drug-seeking drama queen in house clothes. She could have walked forward, could have confronted Pamela, could have raised her voice, demanded accountability, created a scene that would have confirmed every assumption Pamela had already made about the type of person she was. Instead, she turned around, walked back to Bay 7, sat on the stretcher, opened the notebook. 12:52 a.m., overheard charge nurse Stokes at nurse's station, stated to unidentified colleague, patient is drama queen, probably looking for pain meds, classic drug-seeking presentation, also stated, doesn't even have real insurance. Note, my insurance card was reviewed at Triage and accepted without issue. This statement appears to be assumption-based, not fact-based. She wrote it all. Time, location, speaker, content, context. No editorializing, no emotional language. Just facts arranged in the 3-column format that filled every page of this notebook, the same way it had filled others before it, in other buildings, in other cities, when the details had mattered just as much. At 1:04 a.m., Pamela entered Bay 7 unannounced. She carried a plastic hospital bag, the kind used for patient belongings, and set it on the stretcher without explanation. I need your bag off the bed, she said. Infection control policy. Personal items go in the bin or on the chair. Nadine looked at the chair, a single plastic seat pushed into the corner, already holding the blood pressure cuff that no one had used. There was no shelf, no hook, no designated space for patient belongings. The policy Pamela cited might have been real or invented. The effect was the same. Pamela did not wait. She picked up Nadine's leather shoulder bag. The bag containing the notebook, the phone, the manila envelope, everything, and dropped it into the plastic bin beneath the stretcher. Not placed, dropped. The bag hit the metal bin with a thud that rattled the contents. Nadine heard the phone strike the side of the bin, heard the hard edge of the notebook knock against the metal frame. Careful, Nadine said. That bag contains personal medical documents. It'll be fine in the bin. Pamela turned the bedside computer terminal so its screen faced away from the stretcher, angled now toward the corridor entrance, where only staff standing outside the bay could read it. The adjustment was small but purposeful. Nadine could no longer see what was being entered into her chart. I'd like the screen oriented so I can see my own medical record. HIPAA requires staff-facing screens for privacy compliance. HIPAA gives me the right to access my own medical record, not to be prevented from viewing it. Pamela did not respond. She typed something, 2 quick lines, and left. The screen remained turned away. Nadine retrieved her bag from the bin, checked the notebook for damage. The spine was intact, the pen still clipped, and wrote, 1:04 a.m. Nurse Stokes entered bay, removed personal bag from bed, dropped into bin, turned computer screen away from patient. Cited infection control and HIPAA. Both citations appear to be pretextual. Effect, patient cannot observe chart entries. The discipline required to sit in that bay and write instead of shout was not something she had been born with. It was something she had learned. Over years, through practice, in environments where the people making decisions held more power than the people being decided about, and where the only weapon available was documentation. 1:16 a.m. Nadine pressed the call button again. This time the response came faster, 6 minutes, but not from a nurse. The curtain pulled back, and Colt Riggins stood in the opening. 6'2", 240 pounds. The security badge on his chest caught the overhead light. Heard you've been pressing the call button, he said. His tone was not hostile. It was the measured, rehearsed calm of a man who had been trained, or at least briefed, on how to manage difficult patients. Everything okay in here? I need water, Nadine said. And I need to speak with a nurse about my care. The nurses are busy, ma'am. Lots of patients tonight. I understand that. But I've been in this bay for over an hour without any medical attention, and I pressed the call button 3 times before anyone responded. Riggins looked at her the way he had looked at her in the waiting room. The slow scan, top to bottom, assessing not her medical condition, but her threat level, her compliance potential, whether she was the kind of patient who would sit quietly or the kind who would cause problems. I'll let the nurses know, he said. But I need you to stay in your bay, all right? Walking around the department, that causes disruption. I walked to the nurse's station because no one responded to the call button. I understand, but stay here, okay? The word okay came with a step forward, just one, but enough to close the distance between them to less than 3 feet. Enough that his size filled her field of vision. Enough that the implicit message was physical, not verbal. He left without bringing water. Nadine wrote, 1:16 a.m. Security Riggins entered bay. Responded to call button instead of nursing staff. Told me to stay in my bay. Characterized my attempt to seek care as disruption. Did not provide requested water. Second interaction with security. Neither involved a medical professional. 2:22 a.m. Nearly 4 hours since arrival. The pain had changed. Not just pressure now. A spreading ache that radiated through her back, between her shoulder blades, accompanied by a wave of nausea that made her grip the stretcher rail and breathe through her nose. She pressed the call button. 18 minutes. That is how long it took. 18 minutes with the red light blinking silently on the call box. 18 minutes of counting breaths and swallowing against the nausea and gripping the cold metal rail, while her body sent every alarm signal it knew how to send. Pamela Stokes appeared at the curtain. What is it now? My pain has changed. It's radiating to my back. I'm experiencing nausea. These are new symptoms that developed within the last hour. I need to be seen by a physician. Pamela exhaled, a controlled sigh, the kind perfected by people who want you to know they are being patient with you. She stepped to the bedside monitor and powered it on, pressed a pulse oximetry clip onto Nadine's finger, the first piece of medical equipment anyone had used on her in 4 hours, glanced at the number. 96%, that's normal. She removed the clip. Look, Dr. Lund assessed you. His assessment stands. If your symptoms haven't changed, they have changed. I just told you they changed. Back pain and nausea are new. I want to speak with another physician. I'm requesting a second medical opinion. Pamela's expression shifted, the practiced patience giving way to something harder. Dr. Lund is the attending tonight. There is no other ER doctor available. Then I want to file a formal complaint about my care. A formal complaint? Yes. Pamela walked to the bedside computer terminal. Typed. Her back was turned to Nadine, the screen angled away, but Nadine could see the reflection, faintly distorted, in the metal frame of the monitor stand. She could make out fragments, the word agitated, the word demanding. I've noted your concerns in the chart, Pamela said, without turning around. But Nadine had seen the reflection. She knew what noted your concerns meant in the language of defensive charting. She knew that agitated and demanding were not clinical descriptors, but strategic ones. Words chosen to construct a narrative in which the patient was the problem, not the care. What exactly did you write? Nadine asked. Pamela turned. I documented that you expressed dissatisfaction with your plan of care and that you were informed of the physician's assessment. Did you use the word agitated? A flicker. Pamela's left eye twitched. The smallest involuntary response, gone almost before it registered. I documented what I observed. I am sitting in a bed, speaking in a calm voice, making a specific clinical request. That is not agitation. If your note characterizes me as agitated, that note is inaccurate, and I will request a copy of the chart under HIPAA to verify. Pamela stared at her. The silence stretched. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor alarmed, 3 sharp beeps, and another nurse called out a room number. The sounds of the ER continuing around this frozen moment. I'll pass your concerns to Dr. Lund, Pamela said, and left. Nadine wrote everything. The timestamps, the words, the screen reflection, the eye twitch, the specific language she had requested, and the specific language she suspected had been used instead. Page 4 of the notebook. At 2:37 a.m., she made a decision. She stood. Slowly, because the dizziness required negotiation now. A careful sequencing of movements to avoid the gray tunneling at the edges of her vision. She gripped the stretcher rail, then the curtain frame, then the wall, and walked out of Bay 7. Not toward the nurse's station this time, toward the waiting area. On the wall near the entrance to the ER, the wall she had passed on her way in but had not stopped to read, she found what she was looking for. A framed document 3 feet wide, behind glass. Large heading, Patient Bill of Rights, Mercy Ridge Medical Center. Below that, smaller text, organized in numbered paragraphs. She read it aloud, quietly, under her breath, memorizing the sections she needed. All patients have the right to receive care that is considerate and respectful of personal values and beliefs, the right to a prompt and reasonable response to questions and requests, the right to participate actively in decisions regarding their medical care, the right to know the names and roles of people involved in their care. She noted the citation at the bottom of the frame. In compliance with North Carolina General Statute Section 131E-117. She walked back to Bay 7. Pamela was at the nurse's station, watching her return. Their eyes met. Nadine held the gaze. "I'd like Dr. Lund to come to my bay, please. He's with a patient." "I'll wait." She went back to bay 7. 8 minutes later, Lund pulled the curtain aside. His expression carried the tight-lipped control of a man summoned when he did not wish to be summoned. "Ms. Whitfield, Nurse Stokes tells me you have additional concerns." Nadine sat on the edge of the stretcher. She held the notebook open, but did not read from it. She spoke from memory. Under North Carolina General Statute 131E-117, this facility is required to provide a medical screening examination to any individual who comes to the emergency department and requests examination or treatment for a medical condition. I walked into this emergency room at 10:22 p.m. That is now over 4 hours ago. I reported chest pain radiating to my left arm. I have since reported additional symptoms, including jaw pain, back pain, and nausea. In that time, I have not received a screening examination. No EKG, no blood work, no imaging, no physical exam beyond a 2-second pulse oximetry reading. She paused. Let the silence carry the weight. I am formally requesting, not asking, requesting, an appropriate medical screening examination as required by both state law and the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. Lund's face changed. Not dramatically, he was too controlled for that. But the professional mask slipped by 1 degree. Underneath it, something colder, something affronted. Patients did not cite statutes at him. Patients did not distinguish between state law and federal law in the same sentence. Patients did not use the word screening examination as a technical term rather than a casual request. "I've already assessed you," he said. "My clinical judgment is that your presentation does not warrant additional testing at this time. Your clinical judgment was formed without performing any diagnostic tests. That is not judgment, that is assumption." Red crept up his neck, slow, visible, starting below the collar of his white coat. "Are you telling me how to practice medicine?" "I'm telling you what the law requires." The red reached his jaw. His hand tightened on the tablet. For a moment, the bay held nothing but the hum of the fluorescent light and the faint beeping of monitors from other bays and the quiet, immovable presence of a woman in a gray cardigan who had just drawn a line in medical-grade sand. "I'll review your chart," Lund said. The words came out clipped, stripped of their earlier smoothness. He turned and left without pulling the curtain closed. Nadine pulled it closed herself, sat down, opened the notebook. 2:48 a.m. Dr. Lund returned upon request, cited NCGS 131E-117 and EMTALA, requested screening examination. Physician stated clinical judgment does not warrant testing. Reminded physician no diagnostic tests have been performed. Physician left without ordering tests. She flipped to the EMR screen visible on the bedside terminal. Lund had not logged out. The screen was angled toward the stretcher, and she could read the most recent entry. Patient continues to demand unnecessary testing. Medically literate. Possible healthcare worker or internet researcher. Presentation remains non-acute. Assessment unchanged. Plan. Continued monitoring. Reassess for discharge. Medically literate. Possible healthcare worker or internet researcher. The labels were revealing. Not because they were wrong, she was medically literate, but because of what they replaced. In Lund's framing, a patient who knew her rights was not informed. She was difficult. A patient who cited the law was not protecting herself. She was a nuisance. A woman who spoke precisely was not to be taken seriously. She was to be explained away. Internet researcher. The phrase was clinical shorthand for a particular kind of dismissal. The presumption that any patient who demonstrated medical knowledge had acquired it from unreliable sources and was therefore less credible, not more. But Nadine had not learned the word EMTALA from the internet. She had learned it in a conference room on the 7th floor of the Hubert H. Humphrey Building in Washington, D.C., or during a policy briefing on emergency department compliance metrics, sitting 3 seats away from the administrator who wrote the enforcement guidelines. She did not write that in the notebook. She simply underlined EMTALA one more time and turned to a fresh page. If this woman's calm is making you hold your breath, wait until you hear what she does next. Stay with us. The turning point is coming. 3:52 a.m. Nadine needed the restroom. The nausea was building, and her bladder had been protesting for 2 hours. She had not wanted to leave the bay again. The last time she had ventured into the corridor, it had resulted in Pamela's drug-seeking commentary and the implicit warning from Riggins to stay put. But biology was not negotiable. She walked to the corridor. The restroom was marked with a blue sign 15 feet from Bay 7 on the opposite side of the hall. She made it 8 steps before a voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" Riggins again. He had been standing near the supply room entrance, partially obscured by a rolling cart of linens. Positioned, she realized, where he could monitor traffic to and from her bay without being obvious about it. That was not random placement. Someone had told him to watch her. "Restroom," she said. He walked toward her, not fast, deliberate, each step loud on the linoleum. He stopped between her and the restroom door. "You were told to stay in your bay." "I need to use the restroom. That is a basic human need, not a disruption." "I'll have a nurse bring you a bedpan." "I don't need a bedpan. I need to walk 15 feet to a restroom." Riggins did not move. He stood in the center of the corridor, a physical barrier, his body blocking the path the way a locked door would. Not touching her, not threatening her with words, but the message was unmistakable. "You do not move through this space without my permission." Nadine stood her ground. 10 seconds, 20. The fluorescent light above them buzzed. A nurse walked past at the far end of the corridor, glanced at them, kept walking. "I'm a patient," Nadine said quietly. "You are preventing a patient from accessing a restroom. If I need to add that to the documentation I've been maintaining tonight, I will." Something shifted in his eyes. Not fear, not yet, but the calculation of a man who had already been named in a 911 call and was beginning to understand that this particular patient kept score. He stepped aside. One step to the left, just barely enough clearance for her to pass without their shoulders touching. She walked past him, used the restroom, washed her hands in the small sink, and in the mirror, harsh lighting, no kindness in it, she saw what 7 hours in this emergency room had done to her face. The skin beneath her eyes was gray. Her lips had lost color. The sweat had dried to a faint sheen across her forehead that made her look older, frailer, sicker than she had looked when she walked in. She gripped the edge of the sink with both hands and breathed. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, the technique she knew. The discipline she had. When she walked back to Bay 7, Riggins was standing in the same spot, watching her. She did not look at him. She pulled the curtain closed and wrote, 3:56 a.m. Security. Riggins blocked restroom access. Physical positioning to obstruct pathway. Yielded after verbal confrontation. Third intimidation interaction with security. 4:31 a.m. 6 hours and 9 minutes since arrival. The nausea had progressed to active retching. Dry heaves that left Nadine gripping the stretcher rail with both hands, her body folding over itself in spasms that sent lightning bolts of pain through her chest and back. Sweat soaked through the collar of her blouse. Her cardigan had fallen to the floor, and she lacked the strength to pick it up. She pressed the call button. The red light blinked. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes. No one came. She pressed again, held it. 12 minutes. She let go of the stretcher rail, stood. The gray tunneling was worse now, not at the edges anymore, but closing in, narrowing her field of vision to a corridor of light with darkness pressing from both sides. She moved one foot in front of the other, hand on the wall, fingers trailing along the surface for balance, and walked out of Bay 7. The nurses' station was populated. 3 nurses, 2 techs, Pamela Stokes, standing near the medication room with a set of keys. 2 other patients' monitors beeped in their bays. The department was not empty. It was functioning. People were working. But no one had answered Bay 7's call button in 12 minutes. Nadine stopped 5 feet from the nurses' station. She planted her feet. She drew a breath that cost her more than anyone watching would have understood. "I need medical attention." Her voice carried, not shouting, but projected, clear, cutting through the ambient noise of the department with a precision that came from somewhere deeper than volume. "I have been waiting over 4 hours with chest pain. No one has performed basic cardiac screening. I am requesting, for the 3rd time, the medical screening examination I am legally entitled to." Heads turned. A patient 2 bays down leaned out past his curtain. Another patient, a young man in his 20s, with his arm in a temporary splint, pulled out his phone. The red recording light was unmistakable. 12 seconds passed. Then Colt Riggins materialized from the corridor behind the station, moving fast for a man his size, the keys on his belt jangling with each stride. "Ma'am, you need to return to your bay." His voice was louder now, pitched to establish authority in front of the watching staff. "You're disrupting the department. I'll return to my bay when a physician performs the screening examination I've been requesting for 4 hours. That's not how this works." He stepped closer, inside her personal space. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that the radio on his shoulder was at her ear level, close enough that the sheer physical fact of his body, 6'2", 240, became the primary argument in the conversation. "You go back to your bay and you wait for the doctor, or I escort you out." I'm a patient in this emergency room experiencing active chest pain. Removing me does not change that medical fact. Last time, go back to your bay. She did not move. Not out of defiance, though it looked like defiance from the outside. She did not move because the dizziness had reached a pitch where movement itself felt dangerous. Her legs were uncertain. The floor felt soft. If she turned now, she would fall. I can't. He did not wait for the rest of the sentence. His right hand shot out and closed around her upper left arm. The arm that had been numb and tingling for 3 hours. The arm connected to the shoulder, connected to the chest, where her heart was failing, and he pulled. The grip was correctional, the kind of hold taught in detention facilities for controlling non-compliant inmates. Thumb pressing into the soft tissue above the elbow, fingers wrapped around the bicep, leverage applied at the joint to force forward motion. Nadine's feet skidded on the linoleum. Her right hand slapped against the corridor wall for balance, missed, found it again. The momentum carried her 3 steps before her shoulder struck the wall. Left shoulder, impact hard enough to jar her teeth together, hard enough to send a bolt of white pain through the left side of her body that merged with the cardiac pain already there and became something she could not separate. She gasped, not from surprise, from the physical reality of a 59-year-old woman with an active cardiac event being slammed into a hospital wall by a security guard who was supposed to protect her. Riggins released her arm, stepped back. The entire interaction had taken 4 seconds. 4 seconds from grab to wall, impact to release. Fast enough that anyone not watching closely might have missed it. Fast enough that plausible deniability was built into the speed. "Get back to your bay," he said. Quieter now. The witnesses were a problem. The patient with the phone, the nurses who had seen, the tech who had frozen mid-task with an IV tray in her hands. Nadine leaned against the wall. Her left arm hung at her side. The pain was everywhere now. Chest, shoulder, back, jaw. A symphony of damage that made breathing feel like a conscious choice rather than an automatic function. But she did not cry out. She did not collapse. She did not give him the satisfaction of a visible breakdown. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her khaki pants, the right pocket, because her left arm was useless, and pulled out her phone. She dialed 3 numbers with her thumb. 1. The line connected in 2 rings. 911. What's your emergency? My name is Nadine Whitfield. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost her everything she had, but it held. I'm a patient at Mercy Ridge Medical Center Emergency Room, Charlotte, North Carolina. I have been in this ER since 10:22 p.m. with chest pain. It is now 4:51 a.m. In 6.5 hours, no physician has performed a cardiac screening examination. I have requested one 3 times and been denied. Approximately 1 minute ago, a security guard employed by this hospital used physical force against me. He grabbed my arm and pushed me into a wall. I am reporting this incident and requesting that this call be documented as an official record. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. Ma'am, are you currently in danger? I am in the emergency department of a hospital that is refusing to treat me. I have chest pain, shortness of breath, nausea, and left arm numbness. The security guard who assaulted me is standing approximately 10 feet away. I'm documenting this now. Your call ID is MC-25-0, -4-17-0, -3-7-1. The timestamp is 4:51 a.m. Do you need EMS dispatched to your location? I'm already inside the emergency room. I need this facility to provide the medical screening they are legally required to provide. Understood, ma'am. We will notify hospital administration of this call. Is there anything else? The security guard's name is Riggins. The charge nurse is Pamela Stokes. The attending physician is Dr. Trevor Lund. Those are the staff members involved. That is all. She ended the call. Riggins had not moved during the entire conversation. His face had gone through a sequence of expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, and settled on something that looked like the first flicker of professional concern. Not for Nadine, for himself. A 911 call from inside an ER was a red flag that generated paperwork, administrative attention, and the kind of scrutiny that could turn a routine patient management interaction into a formal review. Pamela Stokes appeared at the end of the corridor. She had heard the call. Her expression was unreadable, flat, controlled, the mask of someone who had been in healthcare long enough to understand exactly what a 911 call from a patient meant and exactly how much trouble it could create. Miss Whitfield. Pamela's voice was different now, softer. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. The tone of someone who had just heard the word documented, used by a person who clearly understood what documentation could do. Let me help you back to your bay. "Don't touch me," Nadine said, not angry, just clear. She walked back to Bay 7 under her own power, one hand on the wall, and pulled the curtain closed behind her. In the notebook, she wrote the 911 call ID number, the dispatcher's instructions, the names she had provided, and the time. She noted Riggins's grip, right hand, upper left arm. Estimated 4 seconds of contact, force sufficient to cause left shoulder impact with corridor wall. She noted the witnesses, patient with phone recording, 2 nurses at station, 1 tech with IV tray. Then she closed the notebook and set it inside her bag. The call would generate an automatic notification to hospital administration. Someone would be waking up soon. Someone with a title and a suit and a set of priorities that did not include the medical care of a 59-year-old black woman, but very much included the institutional reputation of a 4-year-old medical center. That someone arrived 27 minutes later. Kirk Ormond, Vice President of Hospital Operations, walked through the ER's administrative entrance at 5:18 a.m. He was dressed in pressed slacks, a button-down shirt, and a navy blazer. The outfit of a man who kept a crisis wardrobe in his car because he understood that emergencies at his level were measured in optics, not vital signs. But he did not go to Bay 7 first. He went to the nurses' station. He found Pamela Stokes and Dr. Lund waiting. Someone had called ahead, prepared them for his arrival, and he listened to their version of events for 11 minutes. Pamela's version: the patient was non-compliant, verbally aggressive, had wandered the department repeatedly, and had called 911 in what she described as an escalation tactic. Lund's version: the patient had been assessed, her presentation was non-acute, and her demands for additional testing were clinically unwarranted. Neither mentioned the ESI Level 4 assignment for symptoms that matched Level 2. Neither mentioned the 12-minute call button response time. Neither mentioned Riggins's hands on her arm. Ormond listened, nodded. Then he made 3 calls. The first was to the IT department. He requested that all security camera footage from the ER, every camera, every angle, from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., be pulled and flagged for administrative review. The phrasing was deliberate. Administrative review meant the footage would be routed to his office before anyone else could access it, before risk management, before legal, before the state. The second call was to the hospital's outside legal counsel. He left a voicemail, 5:29 a.m., too early for the office to be staffed. Kirk Ormond, Mercy Ridge. We have a situation. Patient called 911 from inside the ER. Claims about inadequate care and physical contact by security. I need legal on standby when you open. The third call was to Pamela Stokes, pulling her aside in the medication room where no cameras operated. Document everything from your perspective, he told her. Make sure your notes are consistent with Dr. Lund's. Use the same language, same timeline. If there are any gaps between your account and his, close them before morning shift arrives. Consistent. The word meant coordination, alignment, making sure 2 independent accounts read as though they described the same events in the same way, which is what happened naturally when 2 people witnessed the same thing honestly, and what had to be manufactured when they didn't. Classic institutional pattern. Denial first, then story alignment, then documentation control, then, if necessary, narrative construction, reframing the patient as the problem to justify the care they didn't receive. At 5:36 a.m., Kirk Ormond finally walked into Bay 7. Ms. Whitfield. He extended his hand. She did not take it. He withdrew it smoothly, as though he had expected the refusal, and settled into the rolling stool with the practiced ease of a man who had managed patient complaints for 20 years. His voice was warm, measured, the tone of hotel management rather than healthcare. I'm Kirk Ormond, Vice President of Operations here at Mercy Ridge. I understand you've had some concerns about your experience tonight, and I want to personally assure you that we take every patient's feedback seriously. Nadine looked at him. The blazer, the practiced warmth, the language, concerns, experience, feedback. Management vocabulary designed to reduce a systematic failure of medical care to a customer service issue. She reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook. She opened it to the first page, and she began to read, not paraphrasing, not summarizing, reading every entry, in order, with the times and names and actions she had recorded over the past 7 hours. She read the triage assessment discrepancy. She read the wait time comparison between herself and the patient who arrived after her. She read Riggins's first approach and his implied suggestion that she did not belong. She read Lund's failure to examine her. She read Pamela's overheard comments about drug seeking. She read the call button response times. She read the defensive charting language. She read the statute citations. She read the 911 call transcript. She read Riggins's physical contact, the grip, the pull, the wall impact. She read it all, calmly, without inflection, without accusation, just data. Ormond's smile disappeared at the third entry. By the fifth, his hands were clasped in his lap. By the eighth, his right knee was bouncing, the involuntary tell of a man calculating exposure. When she finished, she closed the notebook. I have documented every interaction, every timestamp, every name, and every deviation from standard protocol that occurred during my time in this ER. The 911 call I made at 4:51 a.m. created an external record that cannot be altered by this institution. The patient who recorded the interaction with your security guard holds additional documentation outside your control. She paused. Let the silence do the work. You have a choice, Mr. Ormond. You can provide me with the medical screening examination I have been requesting for 7 hours, or you can continue the pattern that has been established tonight, in which case every document I've described will be submitted to the agencies responsible for oversight of this facility. She did not name the agencies, did not specify which oversight bodies she meant. The omission was intentional. It left the threat open-ended, and open-ended threats generated more fear than specific ones because they forced the listener to fill in the worst-case scenario from their own imagination. Ormond stared at her. The practiced warmth was gone. In its place, a recalibration. He was looking at her differently now, not as a disgruntled patient to be managed, but as a variable he had not anticipated. Ms. Whitfield, he said carefully, I assure you, we're going to address every one of your concerns. Let me speak with Dr. Lund about your care plan, and we'll get you. I don't need you to speak with Dr. Lund. I need a physician to perform a cardiac workup, an EKG, troponin levels, a complete metabolic panel, the standard of care screening for a patient presenting with my symptoms. Every minute of delay increases risk. I understand. I'll make sure that happens immediately. He stood, smoothed his blazer, walked out, and made his fourth call of the morning, not to a physician, but to Pamela Stokes. Get an EKG ordered, now, before this turns into something we can't contain. Not because the patient needed it, because the situation demanded it. The reason mattered. The reason would always matter. But the EKG, the 12-lead electrocardiogram that should have been performed 7 hours ago, the test that takes 90 seconds to attach and 60 seconds to read, the test that any first-year medical student knows is the first diagnostic step for a patient presenting with chest pain, was finally ordered. Not by Dr. Lund, not by the attending physician responsible for Nadine's care, by a vice president of operations making a risk management decision at 5:41 a.m. But the order was in the system now, and the system responded, not because it wanted to, because it had been forced to. 6:03 a.m. shift change. The night rotation cycled out, the day rotation cycled in. Fresh faces, fresh coffee, fresh energy, the influx of morning staff who arrived without the accumulated fatigue and compromised judgment of 12 hours on the overnight. Dr. Josie Navarro should have gone home. Her shift had ended at 6 a.m. She had been awake for 14 hours. She had a 30-minute drive to her apartment and a cat that needed feeding and a bed that was calling with the gravitational pull of pure exhaustion. But she could not stop thinking about Bay 7. She had seen the chart. She had seen the triage level. She had tried to intervene and been waved off by the attending. Standard hierarchy, standard deference, standard career preservation. She was already in the parking garage, keys in hand, when she stopped. Chest pain, 59 years old, hypertension history, family cardiac history, ESI-4, 0 workup, 7 hours. She turned around. She walked back through the staff entrance, badged through the door, and went directly to the EMR workstation in the break room. She pulled up Nadine Whitfield's chart and read it from the beginning. Arrival time, 10:22 p.m., triage, ESI-4. Chief complaint as recorded, mild chest discomfort, meprosapaced. Patient reported symptoms. She found these only in the nursing notes addendum, half buried in a block of text about non-compliance. Patient states substernal pressure, left arm radiation, jaw pain, diaphoresis. Navarro read those words twice. Then she scrolled to the physician assessment. Vague chest complaint. No objective findings of acute cardiac event. Anxiety likely contributing factor. Medically literate. Possible healthcare worker or internet researcher. Plan. Monitor, reassess, consider discharge. She scrolled further. Nursing notes. Patient increasingly agitated, demanding additional evaluation despite physician assessment. Non-compliant with care plan. Further. Ormond's note from 30 minutes ago. entered by Pamela under his instruction. VP Operations notified at 05:18. Patient concerns documented. EKG ordered per administrative directive. EKG ordered per administrative directive. Not per clinical assessment, not per physician judgment, per administrative directive. The Vice President of Operations had ordered a cardiac test, not the doctor. Navarro stared at the screen. The chart read like a textbook case study in what not to do. Every decision, from the triage downgrade to the failure to examine to the defensive charting to the administrative intervention, formed a pattern so clear that she could have presented it at a morbidity and mortality conference as an example of systemic failure. She closed the chart. She stood up. She walked to Bay 7. Nadine was lying on the stretcher now, the first time she had been horizontal all night. Her eyes were closed. The cardigan was on the floor. Her blouse was damp with sweat. The pulse oximetry clip that Pamela had briefly attached hours ago was gone. No monitor was connected. No IV ran. In 7 hours, the sum total of medical intervention had been 1 2-second pulse ox reading and 1 verbal assessment performed without physical examination. Ms. Whitfield? Nadine opened her eyes, recognized the young resident from hours ago, the one who had tried to help before being sent away. "I'm back," Navarro said, "and I'm not leaving this time." She did not wait for permission. She did not page the attending. She did not consult the charge nurse. She pulled the EKG machine from the supply alcove. It had been sitting 12 feet from Bay 7 this entire time, unused, unneeded according to every clinical decision-maker who had touched this case, and she wheeled it in. "I need you to lie flat. I'm going to place the leads." Nadine lay back. Navarro worked fast, attaching the 12 adhesive electrodes to Nadine's chest, arms, and legs, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. The machine hummed. The paper began to scroll. Navarro watched the tracing emerge, line by line, lead by lead. 6 seconds in, she stopped breathing. ST-Elevation. Leads 2, 3, and a VF. The classic tombstone pattern of an inferior STEMI, ST-Elevation Myocardial Infarction. The electrical signature of heart muscle dying in real time. The signature that had been present for hours. The signature that a 90-second EKG would have detected at 10:22 p.m. if anyone had bothered to run one. Nadine Whitfield was having a heart attack. Had been having a heart attack. For nearly 8 hours. Navarro grabbed the red phone mounted on the wall of Bay 7, the direct line to the cardiac catheterization lab, and spoke 5 words that transformed the next 15 minutes from bureaucratic negligence into controlled medical chaos. "Code STEMI, Bay 7, now!" The alarm sounded. Not a gentle chime, a building-wide alert, the specific 2-tone pulse that meant the cath lab was being activated, that interventional cardiology was being summoned, that a patient's heart was failing and every second mattered. Staff materialized, 2 nurses, a tech, the incoming day shift attending, a respiratory therapist, all converging on Bay 7 with the coordinated urgency of people who had trained for exactly this moment. Nadine's stretcher was unlocked. An IV was placed, the first needle anyone had put in her arm all night. Heparin was administered. Aspirin was crushed and given sublingual. The cardiac monitor finally connected, its display showing the irregular rhythm and elevated ST segments that told the same story the EKG had told. "Doctor." Lund appeared at the edge of the commotion, still on shift for another 20 minutes. His face was the color of old paper. He stood in the corridor and watched as the patient he had diagnosed with anxiety was wheeled past him toward the catheterization lab at emergency speed, surrounded by the full weight of a cardiac response team that he should have activated 7 hours ago. He said nothing. He stepped aside to let the stretcher pass, and the look on his face was not guilt, not yet, but the dawning arithmetic of a man calculating exactly how much trouble he was in. At 6:17 a.m., the cath lab activated. At 6:25 a.m., the interventional cardiologist identified and opened the blocked artery. At 6:31 a.m., a stent was placed. Blood flow was restored. Nadine Whitfield survived. But the damage was done. 8 hours of reduced blood flow to the inferior wall of her heart had killed muscle that would never regenerate. The troponin level, the protein released when heart cells die, came back at 18.4 nanograms per milliliter. Normal is below 0.04. 18.4 was not a number that suggested a close call. It was a number that confirmed catastrophic, irreversible injury. The code STEMI documentation read, in the precise clinical language of a system finally doing what it should have done from the beginning. Code STEMI activated at 6:17 a.m. by Dr. Josie Navarro, PGY2. Patient presented with ST elevation in leads 2, 3, and AVF. Troponin I, 18.4 nanograms per milliliter. Reference range, below 0.04. Door to balloon time, exceeded. Patient arrival, 10:22 p.m. Code STEMI activation, 6:17 a.m. Total elapsed time, 7 hours and 55 minutes. CMS benchmark for door to balloon time, 90 minutes or less. 7 hours and 55 minutes. Against a benchmark of 90 minutes. The number would become the center of everything that followed. It would appear in incident reports and administrative reviews and legal filings and newspaper articles. It would be cited in hearings and depositions and federal compliance investigations. It would become shorthand for a failure so comprehensive that no amount of institutional narrative management could reframe it. But that was later. Right now, at 6:42 a.m. on a Friday morning in April, Nadine Whitfield lay in the ICU recovery bay with an IV in her right arm, a cardiac monitor tracking every beat, and the knowledge, clinical, precise, and permanent, that her heart had been damaged in ways that medication could manage but never repair. Her ejection fraction, measured by echocardiogram 2 hours later, was 38%. Normal is 55 to 70. 38 meant that nearly 40% of her heart's pumping capacity had been lost. She would need a beta blocker for the rest of her life, an ACE inhibitor, a blood thinner. She would tire more easily, climb stairs more slowly, feel the weight of every hour that had been stolen from her in that emergency room. Her phone sat on the bedside table. At 7:12 a.m., it buzzed with a text message from a contact listed as C. Yates. Nadine, just saw your missed call from 5 a.m. Everything okay? Call me when you can. Carolyn, the ICU nurse, a young woman adjusting the drip rate on Nadine's IV, glanced at the phone screen briefly, the way anyone might notice a message on someone else's device. She saw the name, saw the message. It meant nothing to her, just a friend checking in. Nadine read the message. A faint smile crossed her face, exhaustion and pain, and something else, something that looked like the quiet acknowledgement that the next phase was about to begin. She did not call back. Not yet. She set the phone face down on the table and closed her eyes. In another part of the hospital, the phase that Kirk Ormond feared most was already beginning, though he did not yet know it. At 7:38 a.m., Ormond sat in a windowless conference room on the second floor with Dr. Lund and Pamela Stokes. The door was closed. No minutes were being taken. No recording device was running. This was the meeting that would never officially happen. We have a problem. Ormond's blazer was off now, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The practiced warmth was gone, replaced by the operational bluntness of a man in damage control mode. A STEMI patient sat in our ER for nearly 8 hours without a cardiac workup. That is a CMS reportable event. That is an EMTALA exposure. And that patient has a 911 call on record and a notebook full of documentation that she has clearly been compiling since the moment she walked in. Lund sat rigid. His face had not regained its color since watching Nadine wheeled past him. My assessment was based on her presentation. She walked in. She was conversant. She showed every subjective sign of a cardiac event, and you documented it as anxiety. Ormond's voice cut flat. The chart says, vague complaint. She reported substernal pressure with left arm and jaw radiation. Those are her words, Trevor, recorded in the nursing intake. Your note doesn't reflect them. I documented my clinical impression. Your clinical impression is going to be reviewed by every regulatory body that reads the code STEMI report. The door-to-balloon time is 7 hours and 55 minutes. The CMS benchmark is 90 minutes. Do you understand the gap? Silence. Pamela spoke for the first time. She was ambulatory, no visible distress. My triage was based on clinical observation. Your triage put a STEMI at ESI4. Ormond stared at her. The ESI chart on your own wall says chest pain with cardiac risk factors is level 2. Minimum. Pamela's jaw set. The defensiveness was reflexive. 18 years of charge nurse authority compressed into a single expression that said, I don't make mistakes. Ormond leaned forward, lowered his voice. Here's what needs to happen. The chart needs to reflect that appropriate care was considered and that clinical decision-making followed standard protocol. It didn't follow protocol, and we all know it, so we need the chart to tell a story that is defensible. Lund, I need you to add an addendum. Note that you considered additional workup, but that the patient's presentation at the time of initial assessment did not meet clinical criteria for emergent cardiac evaluation. Lund's hands were flat on the table. She didn't refuse anything. She was requesting tests. I can't write that she refused. Then don't write refusal. Write that clinical presentation at triage was inconsistent with the stated symptoms. Write that the patient's calm demeanor and ambulatory status suggested non-acute etiology. Write that your assessment was reasonable, given the information available at the time of the initial evaluation. That's not what happened. That's what the chart will say happened, and the chart is what regulators read. The room was quiet. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere below, the ER continued its work, new patients arriving, old patients discharging, the machinery of emergency medicine grinding forward as though the previous 8 hours had been a normal night rather than a systematic failure. Lund opened his laptop, navigated to the EMR, began typing an addendum. The addendum was time-stamped, 7:42 a.m., 1 hour and 25 minutes after the code STEMI activation that confirmed Nadine Whitfield had been having a heart attack the entire time. The EMR system recorded the timestamp automatically. Every keystroke logged, every entry time-stamped, every modification tracked in an audit trail that could not be edited, overridden, or deleted. A digital chain of custody that existed specifically because healthcare systems had learned, through decades of litigation and regulatory failure, that the chart was only trustworthy if the chart's history was transparent. Ormond did not know about the audit trail, or he did not care. Or he assumed that administrative authority over the IT department meant administrative authority over the data. He was wrong about all three. The addendum entered the system. The audit trail recorded it. And somewhere in the digital architecture of Mercy Ridge Medical Center's electronic health records, a timestamp sat like a buried mine, 7:42 a.m., 90 minutes after the diagnosis it was trying to rewrite, waiting for someone with the authority and the motivation to find it. Nadine lay in the ICU, with her eyes closed and her phone face down on the table, and a damaged heart beating 38% as strongly as it should have. She had not yet called Carolyn Yates back. She had not yet opened the manila envelope in her bag. She had not yet said the words that would transform this hospital's worst night into its defining crisis. But the notebook was in her bag. The 911 record was in the county system. The patient with the phone had a video that was already being texted to 3 people. And the EMR, the hospital's own system, built to protect the institution, now contained the evidence that would eventually be used to dismantle its defense. The morning sun began to filter through the ICU's east-facing windows. The monitor beside Nadine's bed beeped steadily, the rhythm of a heart that was still working, still fighting, still beating, despite everything that had been done to ignore it. And in the conference room on the second floor, Kirk Ormond straightened his tie, put his blazer back on, and told Pamela Stokes to make sure her documentation was consistent before day shift asked questions. He did not know that the woman in Bay 7, the woman in the gray cardigan, the woman his staff had dismissed as a drug-seeking drama queen in house clothes, the woman whose heart attack they had ignored for 8 hours, had built this hospital. He did not know that her name was carved into the cornerstone of the building he was standing in. He did not know that the phone call she was about to make would bring the full weight of the federal government down on Mercy Ridge Medical Center within 72 hours. He did not know any of it, but he was about to find out. 24 hours after a stent was placed in the blocked artery of her inferior cardiac wall, Nadine Whitfield opened her eyes in the ICU at Mercy Ridge Medical Center and took stock of what remained. The cardiac monitor beside her bed traced a rhythm that was steady but weakened, the electrical signature of a heart that was still working but had lost nearly 40% of its pumping capacity. The IV in her right arm delivered a cocktail of blood thinners and cardiac medications through a line that snaked from the pole to the crook of her elbow. The nasal cannula delivered 2 liters of supplemental oxygen, the soft hiss of airflow, a constant companion beneath the mechanical beeping. She had survived. That was the first fact. She had permanent cardiac damage, ejection fraction of 38%, confirmed by echocardiogram 6 hours after the catheterization procedure. Normal was 55 to 70%. 38 meant she would never climb a flight of stairs without noticing, never walk 3 blocks without resting, never wake up in the morning with the easy automatic energy that she had taken for granted for 59 years. That was the second fact. The damage was directly attributable to the delay. 7 hours and 55 minutes between arrival and code STEMI activation. The interventional cardiologist had explained it plainly. Had the blockage been identified within the standard 90-minute window, the damage to her heart muscle would have been minimal. A week of recovery, full return to normal function. Instead, 8 hours of reduced blood flow had killed tissue that would never regenerate. That was the third fact, and it was the one that mattered most. She had been awake for 20 minutes, processing these facts with the methodical patience of a woman who had spent a career turning data into action. She had reviewed the medical chart that the ICU nurse, a different nurse, a kind one, Someone who had nothing to do with the overnight shift had pulled up for her on the bedside tablet. She had read the code STEMI report. She had read the troponin value, 18.4, and understood what it meant. She had read the door-to-balloon time notation and felt something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with cardiac damage. Now she reached for her phone on the bedside table. The screen showed 3 missed calls, 7 text messages, and 14 emails. She ignored them all except one, the text from C. Yates, received at 7:12 a.m. the previous morning. Nadine, just saw your missed call from 5 a.m. Everything okay? Call me when you can. Carolyn. She pressed the call button. Not the nurse call button, the phone call button. The line connected on the second ring. Carolyn. Her voice was thinner than she expected. The residue of anesthesia and exhaustion, and the simple physical reality of a heart working harder to deliver the same amount of blood. It's Nadine. Nadine. Relief, then concern. Your call came in at 5 a.m. I've been worried. What's going on? I need to report a Title VI complaint. The line went quiet. Not dropped, Nadine could hear the ambient sound of an office, the soft click of a keyboard pausing. Carolyn Yates was the regional director of the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Region 4, based in Atlanta. She had held the position for 7 years. She had processed hundreds of Title VI complaints, allegations of racial discrimination in healthcare facilities that received federal funding. She knew the language. She knew the weight of that specific request from this specific woman. Which facility? Mercy Ridge Medical Center, Charlotte. The silence that followed was longer. 5 seconds. 7. Your hospital? That's correct. Nadine, what happened? I walked into the emergency room at 10:22 p.m. on Thursday night with chest pain radiating to my left arm. I was triaged as non-urgent, ESI level 4. I waited nearly 8 hours. No physician performed a cardiac screening examination, no EKG, no blood work, no imaging. I was told I had anxiety. I was physically assaulted by a security guard. I called 911 from inside the ER. A second-year resident finally ran an EKG at 6:17 a.m. and found a STEMI. I'm now in the ICU with permanent cardiac damage. Ejection fraction 38%. She delivered the summary the way she had delivered 100 briefings in her career. Concise, chronological, stripped of emotion. Each sentence a brick in a wall of evidence. I have documentation, she continued. A personal log with timestamps, names, and verbatim quotes. A 911 call record with Mecklenburg County. At least one witness video from a patient who recorded the security guard's physical contact. And the hospital's own EMR contains an addendum entered by the attending physician 90 minutes after the STEMI was confirmed. A retroactive chart alteration visible in the audit trail. Carolyn Yates had heard thousands of complaints. She had investigated facilities across 8 southeastern states. She had seen every variation of the same story. Black patients undertreated, overtriaged, dismissed, ignored. But she had never received a complaint from the woman whose name was on the building. Nadine, I'm opening a preliminary investigation under Title VI, 42 U.S.C. Section 2000D. I'll have an OCR team in Charlotte within 72 hours. A pause. Her voice dropped, the official tone giving way to something personal. Do not let them destroy records. Do you understand? The EMR, the security footage, the triage logs, all of it. If they attempt to alter or delete anything after you filed this complaint, that becomes a separate federal violation. They've already started, Nadine said. The VP of Operations requested security camera footage be pulled for administrative review at 5:22 a.m., 30 minutes after the assault. I don't know what's been preserved and what hasn't. Then we need to move fast. I'll issue a federal records preservation order before end of business today. Fax and email to the hospital's legal department with copy to the board of directors. That puts them on notice that destruction of any relevant documentation constitutes obstruction under federal law. Thank you, Carolyn. Don't thank me. This is what the office exists for. Another pause. And Nadine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened to you, at your own hospital. Nadine looked at the cardiac monitor, watched the green line trace its diminished rhythm across the black screen. So am I. She ended the call and lay back against the pillow. The ceiling of the ICU was white acoustic tile, punctuated by recessed lighting and the occasional smoke detector. Anonymous, institutional, the same ceiling that existed in every hospital ICU in every city in America, a ceiling designed to be looked at by people in the worst moments of their lives. She had helped design this ceiling, Not literally. She had not chosen the tiles or the fixtures. But the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation's $58 million grant had funded the construction of Mercy Ridge Medical Center from the ground up. She had reviewed architectural plans. She had attended construction site visits. She had approved the mission statement that was etched into the marble in the lobby, dedicated to equitable care for all. She had built this hospital because of a death. Her husband's death, 6 years earlier, from a cardiac arrest that had gone unrecognized in an emergency room in Durham, North Carolina, where a black cardiologist presenting with the very condition he had spent his career treating had been told to wait. Dr. Marcus Whitfield had died in a waiting room chair while the television above him played a cooking show to an empty room. That death had broken something inside Nadine that she had rebuilt into purpose. She had left her position at HHS, a career that had spanned 19 years, rising from policy analyst to deputy assistant secretary for health, and founded the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation with the singular mission of building healthcare facilities that would provide equitable care, regardless of race, income, or appearance. Mercy Ridge was supposed to be the proof of concept, the demonstration that if you built the right facility with the right mission and the right funding, the care would follow. She had been wrong. The building was exactly right. The care was exactly wrong. And the proof was beating inside her damaged chest at 38% capacity. She picked up the phone again. This time, she called the hospital's patient rights office. A young man answered, Terrence Adler, patient rights advocate, according to the directory listing. Mr. Adler, my name is Nadine Whitfield. I'm a patient in your ICU, room 712. I need to speak with the chair of the hospital board of directors. A pause. The request was unusual. ICU patients did not typically request meetings with board chairs. Board chairs were governance figures, not clinical ones. The request bypassed every intermediate layer of the hospital's complaint hierarchy. Ma'am, if you have concerns about your care, I can connect you with our patient experience team, or I can document your... I appreciate that, Mr. Adler, but my concerns require the attention of the board chair directly. My name is Nadine Whitfield. I am the founding chair of the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation. Silence. The foundation that built this hospital. Yes. More silence. Then, very quickly, Ms. Whitfield, I'll contact Chairman Caulfield immediately. Please give me 15 minutes. He called back in 9. Chairman Caulfield is on his way to the hospital. He should be there within the hour. Thank you. She set the phone down and reached into her shoulder bag, the same worn leather bag that Pamela Stokes had dropped into a plastic bin 14 hours ago. She pulled out the manila envelope she had been carrying since she left her house Thursday evening. Inside it, a printed copy of the grant agreement between the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation and Mercy Ridge Medical Center. 64 pages. Section 4, paragraph B, highlighted in yellow, containing the compliance requirements she had insisted on when the grant was executed. She also pulled out a laminated identification card, 3 inches by 4 inches, bearing the seal of the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Her photograph, her name, her title, Member, Advisory Committee on Minority Health. Appointment date, 2023, expiration, 2026. She placed both items on the bedside table, beside the phone, beside the cardiac monitor that measured the damage she had sustained, and she waited. If this reveal just gave you chills, you are not ready for what happens when the hospital board finds out. Subscribe now. This story is about to explode. The news moved through Mercy Ridge Medical Center the way fire moves through a building with poor containment, fast, hot, and impossible to control once it reached the corridors where people talked. Terrence Adler called Harrison Caulfield, chairman of the hospital board. Caulfield, 63, retired banking executive, a man who wore his authority like a tailored suit, pulled up the foundation's records on his home computer while still on the phone. He found the name in 11 seconds. Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation. Founding chair, Nadine A. Whitfield. Grant amount, $58,200,000. The cornerstone dedication, made possible by the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation, in memory of Dr. Marcus Whitfield. Caulfield's voice, which had started the call with the measured courtesy of a man accustomed to board governance, changed audibly when the confirmation appeared on his screen. She's in the ICU right now? Room 712. Admitted Friday morning after a STEMI. She's been here since Thursday night. Since Thursday? Caulfield stopped. How long was she in the ER before the STEMI was identified? Adler checked the chart summary he had pulled. Arrival at 10:22 p.m. code STEMI at 6:17 a.m., approximately 8 hours. The sound on the other end of the line was a man breathing through the realization that his institution had just made the worst mistake in its 4-year history. "I'm coming in. Don't let anyone from administration talk to her before I get there. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Caulfield made 2 calls on his drive to the hospital. The first was to Dr. Gail Pemberton, Chief Medical Officer. He delivered the information in 4 sentences. Pemberton's response was a long exhale followed by, "I'll meet you at the hospital." The second call was to Kirk Ormond, VP of Operations. Ormond had been at the hospital since 5:18 a.m. the previous morning and had gone home at 2 p.m. after what he believed was a successfully managed crisis. He had coordinated the chart narrative with Lund, secured the camera footage for administrative review, briefed the outside legal counsel, and documented Pamela's version of events. He had, in his own estimation, contained the situation. Caulfield's call detonated that estimation. "Kirk, the patient in the ER last night, the one who called 911, her name is Nadine Whitfield." "I know. I spoke with her personally." "Did you know she's the founding chair of the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation?" Silence. "Did you know she funded this hospital?" The silence became a void. "Kirk, her name is on the cornerstone." Ormond's response, when it came, was barely a whisper. I didn't make that connection." "No one did. That's the problem." And it was the problem, not because Nadine's identity should have changed the quality of her care, but because it revealed, with brutal clarity, that the quality of care delivered in that ER was so fundamentally broken that even the person who built the building was treated as disposable. If the founder could be ignored for 8 hours while having a heart attack, what was happening to everyone else? Ormond drove to the hospital for the second time in 18 hours. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was calculating. The camera footage he had flagged, the chart addendum he had orchestrated, the instructions to Pamela about consistency. Every action he had taken to contain the situation now looked like evidence of a cover-up directed at the institution's most important benefactor. Pemberton arrived first. She walked through the main entrance, past the marble wall with its etched motto, "Dedicated to equitable care for all," and took the elevator to the 7th floor, ICU. She had spent 22 years building a reputation as a rigorous, principled medical leader. She had served as CMO for 6 of those years. She believed in her institution, believed in its mission, believed that the occasional complaint was an inevitable byproduct of a high-volume emergency department operating under pressure. She had never considered the possibility that the complaints were the point, that they were not exceptions but examples, not aberrations but patterns. She entered room 712 and introduced herself. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm Dr. Gail Pemberton, Chief Medical Officer. I want to personally apologize for any aspect of your experience that did not meet our standards of care. We take every patient's well-being extremely seriously." Nadine was sitting upright in the hospital bed, the head section raised to 45 degrees. The AV was in her arm. The monitor beeped. The manila envelope and the HHS identification card sat on the bedside table, visible but untouched. Pemberton did not wait for a response. She pulled the visitor's chair to the bedside, sat down, and crossed her legs, settling in with the posture of a woman who expected the conversation to be brief. She carried a leather folder embossed with the hospital's logo. Inside it, Nadine could see a printed page, bullet points, talking points, a prepared script. Pemberton had come to manage, not to listen. "I've reviewed the initial reports from the night in question, and I want you to know that I've already spoken with the medical director of our emergency department. We're looking into every aspect of your care." "Then explain to me," Nadine said, "why a 59-year-old woman with chest pain and cardiac risk factors waited nearly 8 hours without a single diagnostic test." Pemberton's expression shifted, the practiced sympathy giving way to something more careful. She uncrossed her legs, recrossed them in the opposite direction. The folder in her lap closed half an inch. "These matters are complex, Ms. Whitfield. Emergency triage is an imperfect system. High volumes, limited resources, clinical judgment calls that are sometimes... Triage worked exactly as designed in this case." Nadine's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The system functioned. The ESI chart on the wall beside the triage window accurately described my symptoms as Level 2, emergent. A human being looked at me, looked at my symptoms, and chose to write Level 4. Another human being entered my room, listened to me describe textbook cardiac symptoms, and chose to write anxiety without performing a single test. Those were not system failures. They were choices. Specific, documented individual choices to ignore a black woman reporting a heart attack. Pemberton's jaw tightened. "I understand your frustration, But I would caution against drawing conclusions about motive. We treat thousands of patients from diverse backgrounds, and would you like to see what diverse backgrounds looks like in your own data? Nadine reached for the bedside tablet, the chart that the ICU nurse had left accessible, and navigated to the ER tracking board with the fluency of someone who had spent years working with healthcare information systems. She turned the screen toward Pemberton. This is your ER's real-time dashboard. Right now, there are 14 patients in the department. I can see the triage times, the wait times, the ESI assignments. I spent 7 hours in your waiting area and treatment bay learning how to read this board. I suggest you spend 7 minutes doing the same. Pemberton did not look at the screen. Instead, she stood, the folder closed with a snap. Ms. Whitfield, I came here to offer the hospital's support during your recovery. I can see you're upset, and that's understandable. But making accusations about institutional racism is a serious matter that requires careful, objective review, not conclusions drawn from a single patient experience. A single patient experience that produced permanent cardiac damage. I understand, and we will review every aspect of... You said that already, twice. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room when two people with authority face each other and neither flinches. Pemberton was accustomed to being the highest-ranking medical professional in any room she entered. She was accustomed to deference, to nods of agreement, to the institutional gravity that made staff and patients alike defer to the letters after her name and the title on her coat. Nadine was accustomed to rooms where the stakes were higher than hospital politics, rooms in the Humphrey Building where policy decisions affected 20 million Medicare beneficiaries, rooms in congressional offices where testimony shaped federal healthcare budgets, rooms where authority was measured not by a title embroidered on a coat, but by the quality of the evidence you carried and the clarity with which you presented it. I am not drawing conclusions, Dr. Pemberton. I am stating facts. Facts documented in my personal notes. She gestured toward the shoulder bag. Facts recorded in your own EMR, including a retroactive chart addendum entered 90 minutes after the STEMI was confirmed. Facts preserved in security camera footage, whatever remains of it after your VP of operations pulled it for administrative review. Facts logged in a 911 call with Mecklenburg County Emergency Services, and facts that are, as of 40 minutes ago, the subject of a federal Title VI investigation by the Office for Civil Rights. The air in the room changed. Pemberton's face, which had been composed into professional concern, went still. A federal investigation? I filed a complaint this morning. An OCR team will be on site within 72 hours. A records preservation order is being issued today. Pemberton stood motionless for a count of 5. Then she excused herself, polite, controlled, the mask firmly back in place, and walked directly to the administrative wing on the 4th floor. She entered her office, closed the door, and drafted an internal memo on her computer. Subject, patient complaint, Whitfield, confidential, staff advisory. Please be advised that a sensitive patient matter is currently under review involving a hospital benefactor. All staff should refer any inquiries, internal or external, to the administration office. Do not discuss patient cases, triage procedures, or departmental operations with anyone outside the hospital. Media inquiries should be directed to the communications department. This advisory is effective immediately. The memo went out via the internal messaging system at 11:47 a.m. to all department heads. It was meant as containment, it read as suppression, and it would later be introduced as evidence in the investigation it was designed to prevent. 3 days passed. During those 3 days, the Federal Records Preservation Order arrived, a 2-page document on HHS letterhead, delivered by fax and certified mail to the hospital's legal department and the board of directors simultaneously. The order cited 42 U.S.C. Section 2000D and required Mercy Ridge Medical Center to preserve all electronic medical records, security camera footage, triage logs, staffing records, internal communications, and complaint files related to the ER's operations for the preceding 36 months. During those 3 days, Nadine was discharged from the ICU and then from the hospital, against the mild objections of the cardiology team, who would have preferred another 24 hours of monitoring. She signed the discharge paperwork with her right hand, accepted the prescriptions for metoprolol, lisinopril, and apixaban, and was wheeled to the main entrance by an orderly who made small talk about the weather and did not know who she was. The wheelchair route passed through the ground floor corridor, connecting the patient tower to the main lobby. At the junction where the corridor met the administrative hallway, Nadine saw him, Colt Riggins, in uniform, walking toward the security office with a clipboard in his hand, his radio crackling with routine chatter. He had not been suspended. He had not been removed from the premises. He was working, 3 days after slamming a heart attack patient into a wall, he was walking the corridors of the hospital as though nothing had happened. Their eyes met across 15 feet of polished linoleum. Riggins stopped. His hand tightened on the clipboard, the same hand that had closed around her arm, the same grip that had pulled her off balance and driven her shoulder into drywall. His expression went through a rapid sequence: recognition, uncertainty, something that might have been defiance, before settling into blankness. Nadine held his gaze. She did not speak. She did not look away. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at people who held power over her body without earning the right, steady, unafraid, with the quiet certainty that the documentation existed and the process was in motion, and his uniform would not protect him from what was coming. The orderly, oblivious to the exchange, wheeled her past. Riggins stepped aside. The wheelchair rolled on. "Friend of yours?" the orderly asked cheerfully. "No," Nadine said. "He's not." She left through the main entrance of the building she had funded. On her way out, she paused in the lobby. The cornerstone was set into the wall to the left of the main entrance, a granite block 2 feet by 3 feet, with carved lettering filled with bronze. Mercy Ridge Medical Center, established 2021, made possible by the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation. In memory of Dr. Marcus Whitfield, dedicated to equitable care for all. She stood in front of it for 11 seconds. Read each line. Touched the carved W of her own last name with her fingertips. Then she walked to her car, started the engine, and drove home. During those same 3 days, Kirk Ormond discovered that the records preservation order covered security camera footage, and that the footage he had flagged for administrative review, specifically the 30-minute window from 4:45 a.m. to 5:15 a.m. on cameras 3 and 5 covering the ER corridor, was no longer under his control. IT had confirmed that the footage from those cameras during that window was listed as unavailable. System maintenance initiated at 05:22. Maintenance had been initiated at 5:22 a.m. The assault on Nadine occurred at 4:50 a.m. The maintenance request came after the event had erased, and the federal order now required an accounting of every frame of missing footage and the personnel responsible for its absence. Ormond called the hospital's outside counsel at 3:14 p.m. on Monday. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. At its conclusion, Ormond retained personal legal representation separate from the hospital's attorneys. During those 3 days, Dr. Josie Navarro, the resident who had activated the code STEMI and saved Nadine's life, sat in her apartment on her day off and read about the Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation on her phone. She read the mission statement. She read the grant history. She read Nadine's biography, the career at HHS, the husband's death, the commitment to equitable care. Then she pulled up the hospital's architectural files, available on the internal staff portal, and found the cornerstone dedication photograph from the opening ceremony in 2021. Nadine Whitfield, 4 years younger, standing beside the granite block with a small crowd of dignitaries and construction workers. Silver hair, simple dress, the same quiet authority that Navarro had glimpsed in Bay 7. She had walked past that cornerstone every day for 2 years and never read it, never connected the name Whitfield on the stone with any living person. The name was just letters carved in granite, part of the building, part of the background, invisible the way the walls were invisible, the way the foundation was invisible, the way the woman in the gray cardigan had been invisible to everyone in the ER that night. Navarro closed her phone and stared at the ceiling of her apartment. She had 7 more months in her residency at Mercy Ridge. She had a career to build, evaluations to pass, and attending Dr. Lund, who still had the power to influence her future. And she had been the only person in that entire department who had done the right thing. That fact sat in her chest like a weight that would not shift. On the 5th day after the incident, the hospital board of directors convened an emergency session. Nadine had requested, through her attorney, a healthcare litigation specialist named Willa Easton, retained the morning after discharge, that the session be conducted as an open meeting rather than a closed executive session. The request cited Section 12 of the grant agreement between the foundation and the hospital. Grantee agrees to maintain transparency in governance matters related to patient safety, civil rights compliance, and grant fund utilization, including making available to the grantor access to relevant board proceedings upon written request. The board's attorney advised against an open session. Chairman Caulfield overruled him. The political calculus was simple: denying a transparency request from the woman who funded the hospital, while a federal investigation was already underway, would generate worse publicity than whatever happened inside the room. The boardroom occupied the southwest corner of the 3rd floor, rectangular table, seating for 12. Wood paneling, framed certificates, a window overlooking the parking structure. At 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, every seat was filled. 12 board members, ranging from community leaders to business executives to healthcare administrators, arranged along the two long sides of the table. Harrison Caulfield at the head. The hospital's general counsel, Mitchell Dawes, to his left. Across the table, Kirk Ormond, in a suit that looked like it had been pressed that morning with more care than usual. Dr. Gail Pemberton, in her white coat, the CMO title embroidered above her breast pocket. Dr. Trevor Lund, who had been summoned from his suspended with pay status and sat with the rigid posture of a man who had been told by his own attorney to say as little as possible. Pamela Stokes, in civilian clothes, the first time anyone in the room had seen her out of scrubs, seated between the hospital's HR director and a union representative. Colt Riggins was not present. His attorney had advised against attendance, citing the pending DA referral. Nadine sat at the far end of the table, directly opposite Caulfield. Willa Easton sat beside her, a leather portfolio open in front of her. Terrence Adler, the patient rights advocate who had connected Nadine to the board chair, sat along the wall in an observer's seat, his own report printed and waiting. Caulfield opened the session with a statement that sounded like it had been drafted by the general counsel and edited for public consumption. The board was committed to patient safety, took all complaints seriously, and had convened this emergency session to review the circumstances of an incident that had raised concerns about ER procedures. Then he turned to Nadine. "Ms. Whitfield, the floor is yours." Nadine did not open with emotion. She did not describe her fear or her pain or the damage to her heart that would last the rest of her life. She opened with documents. This is the moment everything changes. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Because what comes out of this woman's bag is going to dismantle this entire hospital's defense. From the manila envelope, she withdrew the grant agreement, 64 pages, tabbed with colored flags. She turned to the flag section and read aloud, "Grant agreement number HHS-WG HF-2021-007. Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation, grantor. Mercy Ridge Medical Center, grantee. Total disbursement, $58,200,000. Section 4. Paragraph B. Grantee shall maintain compliance with all applicable federal civil rights statutes, including but not limited to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, and EMTALA requirements under 42 U.S.C. Section 1395-D-D. Paragraph C. Failure to maintain compliance may result in grant review, modification of terms, or recovery of disbursed funds at the discretion of the grantor's Board of Trustees. She set the document down and placed beside it the laminated HHS identification card. United States Department of Health and Human Services, Advisory Committee on Minority Health. Member, Nadine A. Whitfield. Appointed, 2023. Current term. The room was silent. Not the silence of attentiveness, but the silence of collective recognition. The moment when every person at the table understood simultaneously that this was not a patient complaint. This was the founding donor of the institution, backed by a federal advisory appointment and a compliance clause that gave her foundation the legal standing to claw back every dollar of the $58 million that had built the building they were sitting in. Nadine continued, calm, methodical. Each receipt delivered with the precision of a prosecutor's opening statement, because that was essentially what it was. Terrence Adler has prepared an independent summary of the incident based on available hospital records. I would ask that he present his findings. Adler stood. He was visibly uncomfortable, a man accustomed to mediating between patients and administration, not testifying before the board against his own employer. But he had reviewed the records, and the records were unambiguous. He read from his report, EMR audit log, patient Whitfield, Nadine. Arrival time, 10:22 p.m., Thursday, April 17th. Triage level assigned, ESI 4, non-urgent. Chief complaint as recorded in triage, mild chest discomfort. Patient's own stated symptoms recorded in nursing intake addendum, substernal pressure, left arm radiation, jaw pain, diaphoresis. These reported symptoms meet criteria for ESI level 2, emergent, per the Emergency Severity Index guidelines posted in this facility's triage area. He turned a page. Physician assessment by Dr. Trevor Lund, timed at 12:31 a.m., 2 hours and 9 minutes post-arrival. Assessment duration, approximately 4 minutes. Physical examination performed, none documented. Diagnostic tests ordered, none. Lab orders, none. Imaging, none. Physician note: vague chest complaint, anxiety likely contributing factor. Plan: monitor, reassess in 2 hours, consider discharge. Another page. Addendum entered by Dr. Lund, timestamped 7:42 a.m., 1 hour and 25 minutes after code STEMI activation at 6:17 a.m. Addendum content: patient presentation at initial assessment was inconsistent with emergent cardiac event. Clinical judgment at time of evaluation was appropriate. This addendum was created after the STEMI diagnosis was confirmed and constitutes a retroactive chart modification. The EMR audit trail records the exact time of entry. A murmur crossed the table. Several board members exchanged glances. The general counsel leaned toward Caulfield and whispered something that Caulfield waved away. Adler continued. Security footage log, ER corridor, camera 7, 4:50 a.m. Security officer Colt Riggins observed making physical contact with patient Whitfield. Patient's left shoulder struck corridor wall. Duration of contact, approximately 4 seconds. No incident report was filed by security staff. Additionally, footage from cameras 3 and 5 covering the ER corridor from 4:45 a.m. through 5:15 a.m. is listed in the system as unavailable due to system maintenance. The maintenance request was initiated by Kirk Ormond, VP of Operations, at 5:22 a.m., 32 minutes after the physical contact incident. No corresponding maintenance work order exists in the IT department's records. Ormond's face had gone pale, not white, gray, the color of a man watching the walls he built to protect himself disassemble brick by brick. Adler set down his report. Nadine's attorney, Willa Easton, placed a single sheet of paper on the table. For the record, this is a copy of the 911 call transcript obtained from Mecklenburg County Emergency Services. Call ID MC-25-0-4-17-0-3-7-1. Date: April 17, 2025. Time: 4:51 a.m. Caller: Nadine Whitfield. Location: Mercy Ridge Medical Center Emergency Room. Caller reports: patient present in ER for over 4 hours with chest pain. No medical screening performed. Physical force used by security staff. This record exists outside the hospital's system and cannot be altered. Caulfield sat at the head of the table, with his hands clasped in front of him. He had chaired board meetings for 6 years. He had navigated budget crises and construction delays and staff turnover and every ordinary challenge a hospital board faces. He had never presided over a meeting where the institution's founding benefactor presented evidence of systematic failure while connected to a cardiac monitor that measured the consequences. Lund had not made eye contact with Nadine since entering the room. He sat with his hands flat on the table, fingers splayed, the posture of a man holding himself in place. Twice during Adler's presentation, his attorney had placed a hand on his forearm. The second time, Lund's arm had been trembling. Pamela Stokes, by contrast, sat with the rigid composure of someone who had decided before the meeting began that nothing said in this room would change her assessment of what had happened. Her union representative, a compact woman in her 50s, with a legal pad and a pen that she clicked at metronomic intervals, flanked her like a shield. Ormond was the most controlled. He sat with his ankles crossed, one hand resting on the table, the other in his lap. His face showed nothing, but his right thumb pressed repeatedly against the side of his index finger, a self-soothing tick that betrayed what his expression concealed. Every time Adler mentioned the camera footage, the thumb pressed harder. When Adler read the finding about the maintenance request, initiated at 5:22 a.m., 32 minutes after the assault, Ormond's composure broke for the first time. He leaned forward, his mouth opening as though to object, and his attorney grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back into the chair. The motion was visible to everyone at the table. The sound of the chair legs scraping the floor was loud in the quiet room. "Mr. Ormond?" Caulfield's voice was sharp. "You will have an opportunity to respond, not now." Ormond settled, but the damage was done. The involuntary lurch forward, the attorney's physical intervention, the scrape of the chair, all of it communicated what no prepared statement could have disguised. He was afraid, and fear in a boardroom was its own kind of confession. "Mr. Dawes," Caulfield said to the general counsel, "before we proceed to individual responses," Dawes chose his words carefully, "the board should be aware that the HHS Office for Civil Rights has issued a records preservation order and that a Title VI compliance investigation is underway. Any actions taken by this board today will be subject to review by federal investigators. I would advise that all decisions be documented, justified, and consistent with both institutional policy and applicable federal law." Translation: whatever you decide, make sure you can defend it under oath. Caulfield turned to the individual seated across the table. Dr. Lund, is there anything you would like to say? Lund's attorney, a private hire, not the hospital's counsel, had briefed him. Say as little as possible. Acknowledge nothing. Express concern. Defer to the review process. I take every patient's care seriously, Lund said. His voice was steady but thin, like a wire pulled too tight. My assessment was based on the clinical presentation I observed at the time. In retrospect, I understand that additional testing should have been pursued earlier. I regret that outcome. You regret the outcome, Nadine said. It was the first time she had interrupted anyone during the proceeding. Not the decision. There is a difference. Lund did not respond. His attorney placed a hand on his forearm, the universal legal gesture for stop talking. Ms. Stokes, Caulfield said. Do you have anything to add? Pamela sat straight-backed, her union representative beside her like a second skin. I followed standard triage protocols based on my clinical observation of the patient's condition at the time of intake. Your clinical observation produced a triage level that was 2 categories below what the ESI guidelines, posted on your own wall, would have indicated for the symptoms the patient reported. Can you explain that discrepancy? Pamela's jaw set. Triage is a clinical judgment. The patient was ambulatory, conversant, and showed no visible signs of acute distress. She reported chest pain radiating to her arm. And I documented the presentation as I observed it. You documented mild discomfort. She reported chest pain. Which word did she actually use? The silence lasted 4 seconds. Pamela looked at her union representative. The representative looked at the table. I don't recall the exact wording, Pamela said. Nadine reached into her bag and produced the notebook. She opened it to the first page. I wrote down my exact words at the time I spoke them. I'm experiencing chest pain. Left-sided, radiating down my arm, shortness of breath. Those were my words. Your chart reads, mild discomfort. I did not use the word mild. I did not use the word discomfort. The board did not rule that day. The proceedings lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. When Caulfield finally called for motions, the decisions came slowly, each one debated, qualified, and documented with the careful language of an institution trying to demonstrate accountability without fully accepting responsibility. Dr. Trevor Lund, suspended from all clinical duties at Mercy Ridge Medical Center, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the independent medical review. His hospital privileges were revoked, though his state medical license remained active, as that was under the jurisdiction of the North Carolina Medical Board, a separate process that would take 8 to 14 months. Kirk Ormond, terminated. The official reason entered into his personnel file was failure to follow established incident reporting protocols and unauthorized interference with security documentation systems. The real reason, the orchestrated chart modification, the coordinated narratives, the camera footage that disappeared under a fake maintenance request, was harder to prove and therefore omitted from the formal record. But everyone at the table understood what his firing meant. Colt Riggins, referred to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office for potential assault charges under North Carolina General Statute 14-33, C-1, assault on a person receiving medical treatment. The board could not fire him directly. Security staff were employed through a contracted firm. But the hospital terminated the contract with the firm, effective in 30 days. Pamela Stokes, placed on administrative leave with pay, pending completion of a comprehensive triage audit. The with pay provision reflected the reality of her union protection. Immediate termination without a formal hearing would have triggered a grievance that the hospital could not afford to fight simultaneously with a federal investigation. Dr. Gail Pemberton. The board requested her voluntary resignation from the CMO position. Pemberton refused. She cited her 22-year record, her contributions to the hospital's accreditation, and her belief that the incident was an isolated failure of individual judgment rather than a systemic issue. She demanded formal proceedings, which the board's bylaws required before involuntary removal, and the matter was tabled until the next regular meeting, 6 weeks away. The session ended at 11:43 a.m. Board members filed out. Attorneys gathered papers. Ormond left through the side exit, avoiding the main corridor. Pemberton walked out with her white coat buttoned, her chin level, her expression communicating nothing except the unyielding certainty that she had done nothing wrong. Nadine sat at the table after everyone else had left. Willa Easton touched her shoulder. That was as much as we could have expected for the first session. I know. Nadine looked at the empty chairs. Lund is suspended but keeps his license. Pamela is on paid leave. Pemberton is still CMO. The only person actually removed is Ormond, and his termination letter blames incident reporting protocols, not the cover-up. The system protects itself. The system always protects itself. Nadine closed the notebook. That's why you need federal oversight to crack it open from the outside. The internal mechanisms are designed to absorb complaints, not resolve them. She stood, slowly, the beta blocker making her blood pressure lower than she was accustomed to, the damaged heart adjusting to every change in position with a perceptible lag, and walked out of the boardroom, past the cornerstone, and into the Charlotte sunlight. On her way down the corridor, she passed Dr. Lund walking in the opposite direction. He had left the boardroom through the main door, while she had paused to speak with Willa. Their paths crossed in the hallway, narrow enough that one of them would need to adjust. Lund did not adjust. He walked straight, his eyes fixed on a point beyond her, his jaw set, his stride carrying the rigid momentum of a man refusing to yield. Nadine stepped to the side, a small movement, a half step toward the wall, the kind of accommodation that costs nothing and changes nothing and yet accumulates over a lifetime into a pattern of making yourself smaller so that the people who failed you can pass without inconvenience. Their shoulders did not touch, but the gap was less than 6 inches, close enough that she could smell his cologne, close enough that the breeze of his passing moved the lapel of her jacket. He did not look at her. He did not slow down. He walked past as though she were part of the wall, the same way he had looked past her in Bay 7, the same way he had documented her pain as vague, the same way the entire system had treated her for 8 hours, as though she were not there. Nadine stopped walking. She watched him turn the corner. She noted the set of his shoulders, not guilt, not regret, but anger. The anger of a man who believed he had been wronged, who believed that a patient's refusal to accept his assessment was the real offense, who would carry that belief into whatever hearing or deposition or courtroom came next and present it as conviction rather than arrogance. She continued to the lobby. She stopped at the cornerstone. 11 seconds, her fingertips on the carved W. Then the parking lot. Then home. In the stairwell between the 3rd and 2nd floors, Lund stopped. His attorney had already gone ahead to retrieve the car. He was alone. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had not planned to call. It rang 4 times before Navarro answered. "Doctor." "Navarro, this is Dr. Lund." His voice was flat, stripped of any collegial warmth. "I understand you filed a complaint with the medical board." Silence on the other end. "I want you to know that I consider that a betrayal of professional trust. You are a 2nd-year resident. I am the attending physician. If you had concerns about my clinical decision-making, the appropriate channel was to discuss them with me directly, not to file a formal complaint that will affect my career for the next decade." Navarro's voice came back steady, though quieter than usual. "I tried to discuss it with you, in Bay 7. You told me to go suture a laceration. That was a clinical priority decision. It was a chest pain patient with no workup after 2 hours. That was the clinical priority. You don't have the experience to make that judgment. I had enough experience to read the EKG that showed STEMI, the EKG that should have been done 7 hours earlier. The stairwell was empty. Their voices did not echo. The concrete walls absorbed sound the way institutional architecture absorbs accountability. If you think this complaint is going to help your career," Lund said, "you're mistaken. Residency programs talk. Attendings remember who the troublemakers are." "Is that a threat, Dr. Lund?" "It's advice, from someone with 15 more years of experience. Your 15 years of experience told you a STEMI patient had anxiety. My 2 years of training told me to run the EKG. I think I'll trust the training." She hung up. Lund stood in the stairwell for a long moment, the phone still held to his ear, the dead line humming. Then he pocketed it and continued down the stairs, his footsteps sharp on the concrete, each one landing harder than the last. 2 months passed. The HHS Office for Civil Rights Team arrived exactly 72 hours after Nadine's complaint, as Carolyn Yates had promised. 4 investigators, 2 data analysts, a compliance attorney, and a field supervisor set up in a conference room on the 2nd floor of Mercy Ridge Medical Center and requested access to 3 years of ER triage records, disaggregated by patient race and ethnicity, chief complaint, triage level assigned, wait time to first physician contact, and diagnostic tests ordered within the first 60 minutes. The data arrived in spreadsheet format. The analysis took 6 weeks. The preliminary findings were transmitted to Yates's office in Atlanta and marked draft, not for public distribution. The numbers told a story that no amount of institutional narrative management could rewrite. Over the preceding 36 months, Black patients presenting to the Mercy Ridge ER with comparable symptoms and acuity levels waited an average of 47 minutes longer than white patients before receiving physician contact. Black patients were 31% more likely to be triaged at a lower ESI level than their reported symptoms warranted. Black patients with chest pain were 26% less likely to receive an EKG within the first 30 minutes of arrival. The disparities were not random. They were not explainable by differences in insurance status, time of day, or department volume. They were consistent across shifts, across days of the week, across seasons. They were structural, embedded in the way the ER functioned, not as an aberration, but as a feature. The OCR team's preliminary report concluded, preliminary findings indicate a pattern of differential treatment in the emergency department of Mercy Ridge Medical Center that is consistent with potential violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. A formal investigation is recommended. The report was 53 pages long. Nadine Whitfield's case was cited on page 4 as the index event that triggered the investigation. Her 8-hour wait, her troponin of 18.4, her ejection fraction of 38%, all reduced to data points in a table that proved she was not an exception. She was the pattern, made visible. The North Carolina Medical Board opened its own investigation into Dr. Trevor Lund on a parallel track. The board received a formal complaint, filed by Dr. Josie Navarro, who had spent 3 weeks deliberating before pressing the submit button on the board's online portal at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night when she could not sleep. The complaint alleged failure to perform an appropriate medical screening examination, failure to order diagnostic testing indicated by the patient's reported symptoms, and documentation that misrepresented the clinical encounter. The medical board's process would take between 8 and 14 months. During that time, Lund retained his license but could not practice at Mercy Ridge. He applied to 2 other hospitals in the Charlotte area. Both declined, citing the pending investigation. He remained employed, technically, by his physician group, drawing a reduced administrative salary while his clinical privileges evaporated. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney charged Colt Riggins with simple assault under North Carolina General Statute 14-33. The arraignment was scheduled for 6 weeks after the incident. Riggins posted bond the same day, $2,500, paid through the security company's insurance fund, and was released. His defense attorney issued a statement. Mr. Riggins was performing his duties as a security professional in a hospital emergency department. He used minimal appropriate force to redirect a patient who was creating a disruption in a clinical area. We are confident he will be fully exonerated. Willa Easton, Nadine's attorney, filed a separate civil suit the same week. Personal injury, negligent infliction of emotional distress, and violation of the patient's right to receive care without physical coercion. The suit named Riggins individually, the security contracting firm, and Mercy Ridge Medical Center as co-defendants. The damages sought were not specified in the initial filing, which under North Carolina civil procedure meant the amount exceeded $25,000. Riggins' defense attorney immediately filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the security guard's actions fell within the scope of his employment and were protected under the facility's patient management protocols. The motion cited the hospital's own security training manual, which authorized reasonable physical redirection of patients who present a disruption risk to clinical operations. Reasonable physical redirection, the language sounded clinical, professional, neutral. It did not describe what Nadine felt when a 240-pound former corrections officer closed his hand around the arm that was numb from a heart attack and pulled her into a wall. But legal language rarely described what people felt. It described what institutions needed to justify. If convicted on the criminal charge, the maximum sentence was 60 days. The trial was scheduled for 4 to 6 months out. Most observers expected a plea deal, a misdemeanor conviction, probation, no jail time. The system's response to a man who slammed a heart attack patient into a wall: paperwork. Pamela Stokes returned to duty after 6 weeks of paid administrative leave. Her personnel file noted the completion of a mandatory retraining program, triage assessment best practices, focus on equitable patient evaluation. The program lasted 8 hours. It was conducted in a conference room at the hospital's administrative annex by an outside consultant who had been contracted 3 days earlier. The consultant presented slides about implicit bias, cultural competency, and evidence-based triage protocols. Pamela sat in the front row, took notes, and passed the post-assessment with a score of 92%. The assessment did not ask whether she believed her triage of Nadine Whitfield had been correct. It did not ask whether she had described a chest pain patient as a drama queen and a drug seeker. It did not ask whether she had used the words actual emergencies to dismiss a woman who was, at that moment, having one. It asked whether she could identify the correct ESI level for a series of hypothetical patient scenarios presented on a multiple-choice exam. She could. She always could. The knowledge was never the problem. The application of that knowledge, specifically which patients received it and which did not, was the problem. And the retraining program did not measure application. It measured recall. The difference was the difference between knowing the right thing and doing it. She was assigned to a different shift, day rotation instead of nights, which Mercy Ridge's administration characterized as scheduling optimization, and which everyone understood as, put her where there are more witnesses. Dr. Gail Pemberton remained chief medical officer. The board's next regular meeting addressed the question of her voluntary resignation, and she again refused. The board voted, 7 in favor of pursuing formal removal proceedings, 5 opposed. The 7-5 split did not meet the 2/3 supermajority required by the board's bylaws for involuntary removal of a senior medical officer. Pemberton survived. She issued a public statement. Mercy Ridge Medical Center is committed to providing equitable, high-quality care to every patient, regardless of background. The incident involving Ms. Whitfield was an isolated event that does not reflect our institutional values or the dedication of our staff. We are cooperating fully with all investigations and implementing enhanced training and oversight protocols. Isolated incident. The phrase appeared in hospital communications 11 times over the following weeks. It appeared in press releases, in internal memos, in Pemberton's talking points for a local television interview. Isolated incident. The institutional vocabulary of containment deployed to prevent one case from being understood as evidence of a system. Nadine read the statement on her laptop in the home office of her foundation headquarters in Charlotte's 4th Ward. The room was small. A converted bedroom, lined with bookshelves, a desk facing the window. From that window, on a clear day, she could see the top floors of Mercy Ridge Medical Center rising above the Midtown skyline. The building she had raised $58 million to construct. The building whose cornerstone bore her name and her husband's memory. She read Pemberton's statement a second time. She noted the word isolated. She thought about the number 47, the average additional minutes that Black patients waited in the ER she had built. Then she opened an email from Paulette Voss, an investigative reporter at the Charlotte Observer, who had been working the story for 3 weeks. Ms. Whitfield, I've been analyzing ER data obtained through public records requests filed with the State Health Department. Our analysis shows that Black patients at Mercy Ridge wait an average of 47 minutes longer than white patients with comparable chief complaints. We've also identified a pattern of triage-level downgrades affecting Black patients at a rate significantly higher than other demographic groups. This data is consistent with findings from academic studies on racial bias in emergency triage nationally, but the Mercy Ridge numbers are among the most pronounced in the Charlotte metro area. Would you be willing to discuss your experience on the record? 47 minutes. The average. Nadine had waited 475 minutes. She was not the exception. She was the furthest point on a curve that bent the same way for every Black patient who walked through those automatic glass doors. She began to type a reply. In the middle of the HHS investigation, a detail emerged that neither Nadine nor the OCR team had anticipated. The security camera footage from cameras 3 and 5, the footage that Kirk Ormond had claimed was lost to system maintenance, was indeed gone. Not corrupted, not misfiled, deleted. The IT department's forensic review confirmed that the deletion had been executed at 5:26 a.m. on the morning of the incident, 4 minutes after Ormond's maintenance request. But the deletion had not been executed by Ormond. The system log showed the action performed under the login credentials of a network technician named R. Calloway. R. Calloway had been on approved medical leave since April 14th, 3 days before the incident. He was not in the building. He did not have remote access to the security server. His login credentials had been used by someone else. The IT director reported this finding to the OCR team and to the hospital's general counsel simultaneously. The general counsel immediately recognized the implications. Unauthorized use of another employee's credentials to delete evidence constituted a separate violation, computer fraud under North Carolina law, potential obstruction under federal law if the deletion was connected to an attempt to conceal evidence relevant to the Title VI investigation. Who had used Calloway's credentials? The IT forensic trail ended at a workstation, a desktop computer in the operations suite on the 4th floor. The operations suite where Kirk Ormond had an office. The office that Ormond had vacated when he was terminated. Ormond had been terminated for failure to follow incident reporting protocols. He had not been charged with evidence destruction because, at the time of his firing, the board did not have the IT forensic analysis. Now the analysis existed, and it pointed to his workstation, but Ormond was gone. He had already retained personal counsel. He He was not compelled to cooperate with the hospital's internal investigation, and the Federal Investigations Subpoena Authority would take weeks to engage. The question of who deleted the footage sat in the case file like an open wound, documented, acknowledged, and unresolved. Terrence Adler, the patient rights advocate, submitted his resignation 4 days after the board hearing. He had worked at Mercy Ridge for 3 years. He had processed 147 patient complaints during that time. He had believed, genuinely, naively, that the complaint system worked, that concerns were investigated, addressed, and resolved in good faith. Then he found the pattern. While preparing his report for the board hearing, he had pulled the complete complaint history for the ER, something he had never done before, because individual complaints were handled individually, resolved individually, filed individually, without anyone ever looking at the aggregate picture. What he found when he assembled the aggregate picture was that 3 complaints filed in the preceding 2 years shared identical characteristics with Nadine's case. 3 Black patients, all women, all presenting with acute symptoms, chest pain, stroke-like symptoms, abdominal emergency, who had been triaged at ESI levels lower than their reported symptoms warranted, who had waited significantly longer than comparable white patients, and who had filed formal complaints through the hospital's internal system. All 3 complaints had been closed. Status: reviewed and resolved, no further action required. Review authority: CMO office, Pemberton's office. The same office that had just issued a memo characterizing Nadine's case as an isolated incident and instructing staff not to discuss it. Adler forwarded the 3 complaint files to the HHSOCR team on a thumb drive hand-delivered to the lead investigator during a scheduled interview. He included a cover memo that read, "These complaints predate the Whitfield incident and suggest a pattern of triage disparities that was reported through internal channels and administratively closed without substantive investigation." The closure authority in all 3 cases was the Chief Medical Officer's office. His resignation letter was shorter, 1 paragraph, addressed to Harrison Caulfield, chairman of the board. "I am resigning my position as patient rights advocate at Mercy Ridge Medical Center, effective immediately. I cannot in good conscience continue serving as an advocate for patient rights in a facility where patient rights complaints are systematically received, administratively classified, and buried by the very office responsible for investigating them. The system is designed to absorb complaints, not to resolve them, and my participation in that system makes me complicit in its failure." He cleaned out his desk on a Thursday afternoon, took the elevator to the lobby, walked past the cornerstone without looking at it, drove home. 3 weeks after the board hearing, Nadine sat at her foundation office desk and composed an email. She addressed it to josie.navarro@mercyridge.org. "Dr. Navarro, thank you for doing what your training required and your colleagues refused. Your decision to return to Base 7 after your shift ended and to perform the EKG that no one else ordered saved my life. That decision required more than medical knowledge. It required moral courage, and I recognize the professional risk you accepted in overriding the attending physician's plan of care. The Whitfield Grace Healthcare Foundation offers an annual fellowship for early career emergency physicians committed to advancing equity in acute care delivery. The fellowship provides 2 years of funded research and clinical training at a partner institution. I would like to discuss whether this might be of interest to you. With gratitude, NW." She reviewed the email twice, sent it, closed the laptop. In her apartment across town, Josie Navarro received the email on her phone while eating leftover pasta at her kitchen counter. She read it 3 times, set the phone face down, picked it up, read it again. The fellowship was an opportunity, a real one. Funded, prestigious, the kind of thing that launched careers, but accepting it meant accepting the label that came with it. The whistleblower, the resident who defied the attending, the person who broke ranks. In a profession built on hierarchy and deference, that label followed you from hospital to hospital, from job application to recommendation letter, for the rest of your career. She opened the email reply field, typed, "I'm interested," stared at the words, deleted them, typed, "Thank you for thinking of me. I need some time to consider." Stared, deleted, typed, "Dr. Whitfield, I appreciate your generosity, but I'm not sure this is the right time for..." Deleted. She closed the email app, set the phone on the counter, stared at the ceiling. The pasta went cold. The next day, she opened the email again. She had not slept well. The ceiling had offered no answers. But the morning had brought a clarity that exhaustion sometimes provides. The realization that the question was not whether accepting the fellowship was risky, but whether declining it was something she could live with. Whether she could spend the next 7 months of her residency walking past the cornerstone, working in the ER, treating patients under a system that had proved itself willing to let a woman die for the color of her skin, and pretend that her only obligation was to complete her training and move on. She typed 2 sentences. "Thank you. I'd like to discuss the fellowship at your earliest convenience." She pressed send before she could delete it again. 2 months and 6 days after Nadine Whitfield walked into Mercy Ridge Medical Center and was told to sit down and wait, the hospital issued a press release announcing a series of enhanced patient safety initiatives: mandatory implicit bias training for all ER staff, a revised triage protocol requiring dual nurse verification for all ESI Level 4 and 5 assignments, real-time electronic auditing of wait times disaggregated by patient demographics, a new patient experience hotline with direct reporting to the board's quality committee rather than the CMO's office. The press release did not mention Nadine's name. It did not reference the federal investigation. It did not acknowledge the 47-minute racial disparity in ER wait times. It described the initiatives as proactive enhancements reflecting Mercy Ridge's ongoing commitment to equitable care excellence. Proactive, as though the enhancements had been planned before they were forced, as though the investigation had not prompted them, as though the cornerstone's promise of equitable care for all had been honored rather than betrayed. Nadine read the press release on her phone, sitting in the cardiology office at Duke University Medical Center, where she had transferred her follow-up care. The cardiologist, a woman her age, someone she had met years ago at a medical policy conference, reviewed her latest echocardiogram results. Ejection fraction is holding at 39%, up 1 point from last month. That's encouraging, but I want to be clear. We're talking about optimization, not recovery. The damaged tissue is permanent. I understand. You're tolerating the medications well? The metoprolol makes me tired by 3 p.m. The apixaban means I bruise if I bump a door frame. But yes, I'm tolerating them. Good. The cardiologist paused, looked at her not as a physician looks at a patient, but as a colleague looks at a peer. Nadine, what they did to you, what they didn't do. I've been reviewing your case for the board certification teaching module I'm developing. With your permission, I'd like to use it as a case study. De-identified, of course, but the teaching value is enormous because it happens every day. Yes, the cardiologist's voice was quiet. It happens every day to people who don't have your resources, your documentation skills, your phone contacts. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Nadine looked out the office window. Durham, not Charlotte. A different city, a different hospital, the same system. I had a notebook and a federal advisory appointment and the personal phone number of a regional OCR director. And it still took 8 hours for someone to run a 90-second test. What happens to the woman who walks in with the same symptoms and none of that? The cardiologist did not answer. They both knew. On a Thursday night, 11 weeks after the incident, the automatic glass doors of the Mercy Ridge Medical Center emergency room slid open. A woman walked in. Black, mid-40s, wearing a fast food uniform with a name badge pinned to the collar. She held her stomach with both hands, her face tight with pain. She approached the triage window. Pamela Stokes looked up from the screen. She was back on duty. Day shift now, not nights, but the evening rotation occasionally pulled her into the overlap hours between 6 and 10 p.m. She had completed her retraining. She had passed the assessment. She had a letter in her personnel file confirming full reinstatement with no restrictions. Name? The woman gave her name. Pamela typed. Date of birth? The woman answered. Pamela typed. Insurance? The woman pulled a Medicaid card from her pocket. Pamela looked at it. The state-issued card, the familiar format, the coverage type that triggered specific billing codes and, in some ER cultures, specific assumptions about the person carrying it. She looked at the card. She looked at the woman. The uniform, the name badge, the pain on her face, the hands gripping her abdomen. She looked back at the screen. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Chief complaint, abdominal pain. Onset, 2 hours. Severity, patient reports 8 out of 10. The cursor blinked in the triage level field. 5 options, 5 numbers. 5 classifications that determined how quickly this woman would be seen, how seriously her pain would be treated, whether the system would respond to her need or make her wait. Pamela typed a number, ESI Level 4, non-urgent. The woman took the printed wristband and walked to the waiting area. She sat in the third chair from the left in the main row. The same chair, though she had no way of knowing this, where Nadine Whitfield had sat 11 weeks earlier with a heart that was dying. The waiting room was half full. The fluorescent lights hummed. The television on the wall played a 24-hour news channel with the captions scrolling and the volume too low to hear. The vending machine in the corner cycled its compressor with a low, steady drone, and the clock on the wall counted forward, minute by minute, second by second, measuring the distance between a patient's need and the system's willingness to respond. The corridor was long, the chairs were hard, and the wait, for this woman, for the next, for the one after that, for every person who walked through those automatic doors carrying pain and vulnerability, and the hope that the word emergency meant someone would treat them with urgency. The wait continued, because policy changes were announced, but whether they would be enforced, whether the retraining had changed anything inside Pamela Stokes besides the letter in her personnel file, whether the dual nurse verification would catch what the single nurse judgment had missed, whether the real-time demographic auditing would flag the pattern before the pattern produced another damaged heart, only time would tell. And somewhere in the Charlotte night, in a home office overlooking the skyline, Nadine Whitfield sat with a cup of tea growing cold on her desk and a bottle of metoprolol beside her keyboard, and the ache of 38% that lived now in the center of her chest like a second pulse. She had the Charlotte Observer story pulled up on her screen. Paulette Voss had published it that morning, front page, above the fold. Mercy Ridge, ER data shows persistent racial disparities in patient wait times and triage classifications. 47 minutes. On average, for every black patient who walked through those doors. She closed the laptop. She looked out the window. The top floors of Mercy Ridge Medical Center were visible in the distance, lit from within, glowing against the dark sky like a lantern. Beautiful from a distance. Exactly what a hospital should look like. She had built that building because she believed that the right structure could produce the right outcomes. She had been wrong, and the wrongness lived in her chest at 38%, and the building still glowed, and the ER still ran, and somewhere inside it a woman in a fast food uniform sat in a plastic chair, waiting for someone to decide that her pain was real. The cornerstone still read, "Dedicated to equitable care for all." The question was whether the words would ever mean what they were supposed to mean, whether the gap between the carving and the care would close, whether $58 million and a federal investigation and a damaged heart and a notebook full of evidence would be enough to change the way a system treated the people it was built to serve. Nadine did not know the answer. She knew only that the question would outlast her, that the work would continue after the investigation closed and the press coverage faded and the policy changes settled into routine, and the institution absorbed the crisis the way institutions always absorb crises, slowly, partially, with just enough reform to satisfy the regulators and just enough inertia to preserve the patterns underneath. She finished her tea. She took her evening medication, the pills that kept her alive, the daily reminder of the 8 hours that had been stolen from her. She turned off the desk lamp. The building glowed on the horizon. The clock in the ER counted forward, and the story, this story, and every story like it in every emergency room in every city in this country, continued. Not ended, never ended, continued.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.